I used to think the worst part of working nights as a deputy was the boredom. Most nights out here, you're just driving the same empty roads, staring at the same pale glow of your dashboard, waiting for your radio to crackle to life. Hours can pass without a single call, and when you do get one, it's usually some drunk swerving on the highway or a teenager thinking it's funny to knock over mailboxes. But boredom can be a kind of comfort, too. You don't realize it until you have a night where something shifts, where you're sitting in that silence, and suddenly you wish it would never end. That's how I felt the night I got the call about the woman on County Road 9. It was just past midnight, and I'd parked outside a gas station that had been closed for hours. My coffee was cold, the kind of thick, bitter sludge that sticks to the back of your tongue, and the radio was turned low. I was half dozing when dispatch called me. Unit 7, report of a stranded motorist, County Road 9. Female caller says she saw a woman walking along the roadside, possibly in distress. My first thought was annoyance. County Road 9 is the kind of place no one drives unless they have to. It's a long, unlit stretch cutting between fields and forest. I'd been down it dozens of times on patrol, and I could count on one hand the number of houses along it. Most people avoid it after dark. I keyed the radio. Copy, en route. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe a broken-down car. Maybe someone walking home drunk. Out here, people call 911 for things that barely qualify as emergencies. I figured I'd be back sipping my sludge coffee in 15 minutes. The drive out there was quiet. Too quiet. My headlights stretched out ahead of me, carving through the dark. The moon was hidden behind clouds, so all I could see outside that cone of light was blackness and the occasional gleam of fence wire. I kept telling myself it was nothing. Still, my hand gripped the wheel a little tighter the further I went. About 10 minutes later, I saw her. She was standing on the shoulder, maybe 30 yards ahead. A lone figure in the dark. The white of her clothing caught the beam of my headlights, pale and sharp against the night. She wasn't waving me down. She wasn't moving at all. Just standing there facing the road. I slowed the cruiser. My first thought was accident victim, maybe dazed, in shock. But the closer I got, the stranger it felt. Her clothes weren't the kind of thing you'd expect for someone walking a country road at midnight. It wasn't a coat or a hoodie. It was lighter, thin fabric, loose. It almost looked like a nightgown. I pulled over onto the shoulder and clicked on the spotlight. The beam washed over her, and I could see more clearly. She was young, 20s maybe, long hair hanging down, the wind barely stirring it, barefoot. Her skin looked pale, almost gray in the light. She didn't shield her eyes from the glare, didn't react at all. I stepped out of the cruiser, hand resting on my belt. "Ma'am, you all right?" No answer. I walked closer, boots crunching on the gravel. My radio hissed softly at my shoulder, and for some reason that sound felt too loud. She didn't move, didn't turn her head, just stared straight ahead. "Ma'am," I said again, keeping my voice steady. "Are you hurt? Do you need help?" That's when I realized she wasn't looking at me. Not exactly. Her eyes weren't following me as I moved. They were fixed a little past me, like she was staring at something behind my shoulder. I stopped. A chill crept up my spine. The kind that makes you want to glance over your shoulder, even though you know you'll regret it. But there was nothing. Just the open road stretching behind me. I took a slow breath. Maybe she was on something. Meth, bath salts, who knows? We get our share of that out here. "Ma'am, can you tell me your name?" Still nothing. I reached for my radio. "Dispatch, I've got the female on County 9. She's non-responsive. Can you send EMS out my way?" "Copy, Unit 7, sending EMS." I clipped the radio back, stepped closer. I was maybe 10 feet from her now. That's when I noticed her feet. Bare, like I'd thought, but not just bare. Cut up, raw. Her soles were dark with dirt and blood, like she'd been walking for miles. I swallowed hard. "Ma'am, let's get you some help, okay?" Finally, she moved. Her head turned, slow, mechanical. Her eyes locked onto mine. They were glassy, wide, like she hadn't slept in weeks. But the expression on her face wasn't fear, wasn't relief. It was empty. Her lips parted and I thought she might speak, but no sound came out, just the faintest rasp like her throat was dry. I don't know why, but that sound made my skin crawl. I took a step back. She took a step forward. Not fast, not threatening, just following. The gravel shifted under her bloody feet as she moved closer. My hand brushed against my holster out of instinct, though I knew I wasn't about to draw on her. "Stay right there," I said firmly. She stopped, tilted her head like she was trying to understand the words. And then she smiled. It wasn't wide, just the smallest curl of her lips, but it was wrong. Empty, like everything else about her. Before I could say anything else, my radio crackled again. "Unit 7, be advised. Caller who reported the female says they don't see her anymore. She disappeared before you arrived." I froze. The radio hissed in the stillness. My stomach dropped. I turned back to the woman. She was gone, not walking away, not running, just gone. The road was empty, both directions. My spotlight cut through the dark, showing nothing but gravel and weeds. I spun in a slow circle, scanning the ditch, the tree line, the road behind me. Nothing. It was impossible. I'd been watching her. I hadn't looked away long enough for her to go anywhere. But she wasn't there. I stood frozen, my pulse hammering in my ears, until the distant wail of an ambulance siren reached me. That sound should have been a relief, but it only made the emptiness of the road feel sharper. When EMS arrived, I tried to explain. They searched the area with flashlights, walked the ditches, even checked the trees. Nothing. The paramedic gave me a look like I'd wasted his time, like I'd been spooked by shadows, but I know what I saw. I got back in the cruiser, closed the door, and sat there for a long time before driving away. My headlights stretched down the black road, but I couldn't shake the feeling that if I stopped again, she'd be standing there, waiting. I didn't tell anyone else at the station the full story, just wrote it up as an unfounded welfare check. But that night, driving back, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her sitting in the back seat, pale and barefoot, smiling that thin, empty smile. And I'll be honest with you, even now, years later, I still avoid County Road 9 when the shift runs late. Because every time I think about it, I remember that look in her eyes. Not just empty, like she was watching something I couldn't see, like she was waiting for it to come closer. When I got back to the station that night, I didn't know what to write in the report. You can't exactly put down, "Found barefoot woman in white dress, pale as a ghost, bleeding feet, vanished into thin air when I blinked." No one would take that seriously, so I kept it simple. Checked the area, no contact. Unfounded, clean, boring. That way, no one asked questions. But the truth stuck with me. I drove home that morning feeling like I had gravel under my skin. Couldn't shake the image of her face, those empty eyes staring just past me. Couldn't forget the sound of my radio, telling me she'd disappeared. When I'd been looking right at her, I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. Fatigue, dark roads, tricks of the headlights. But deep down, I knew what I saw. 2 nights later, I was back on shift when Sheriff Dalton called me into his office. Dalton was the kind of man who carried silence like a weapon. He'd sit there chewing his tobacco, staring at you long enough to make you sweat before he even spoke. "You were on County 9 the other night," he said. "Yes, sir." He leaned back in his chair, studying me. "Woman in white, right?" My stomach dropped. "How'd you know that?" Dalton spat into a styrofoam cup. "Because you ain't the first deputy to write up a ghost call out there." He opened a drawer and slid a thin folder across the desk. I picked it up. Inside were reports going back decades. All the same. Stranded woman on County 9. Pale, silent, gone when approached. Deputies always wrote them off as unfounded, but the descriptions matched year after year. The hair on my arms stood straight up. Dalton said, "We don't put it in the system anymore. No point. You can't catch her. Can't talk to her. You just see her." I frowned. "So what is she?" He shook his head. "Don't know. Don't want to know. But I'll tell you this. Don't ever stop for her again." That was the end of the conversation. He dismissed me like it was nothing, but I couldn't leave it alone. On my days off, I went digging. Old newspapers, county records, whatever I could find. And after a week of searching, I found her. Her name was Emily Carter, 22 years old. Went missing in 1979. She lived not far from County Road 9. According to the article, she left her house one night wearing a white nightgown, told her mother she was going to meet someone. She never came back. Search parties combed the area for weeks. They found blood on the roadside, barefoot prints in the gravel, but nothing else. No body, no suspect. Case went cold. Looking at her photo in the old paper, my chest tightened. It was her. Same long hair. Same pale face. The woman I saw had been missing for over 40 years. I sat at my kitchen table staring at that yellowed clipping until the coffee in my mug went cold. My mind kept circling the same thought over and over. How can you see someone who's been dead for decades? When I went back on shift, I asked around carefully. Not too obvious, just feeling it out. Some deputies gave me blank looks. Others gave me the kind of silence that means they know exactly what you're talking about, but they won't say it out loud. It was an older deputy, Rogers, who finally gave me something. He caught me outside the station one night, lit a cigarette, and said quietly, "You saw her, didn't you?" I didn't answer, but I guess my face gave it away. Rogers nodded. "Yeah, I saw her back in '92. Same spot, same damn look. I pulled over, asked if she needed help, and she just disappeared. I asked him what he thought she was. He blew smoke into the cold night air. Some folks say she's a ghost. Others say she's a warning. My granddad used to talk about her, said his father saw her too. That road's been cursed since before our time. Locals will tell you, never stop for the woman in white." I asked if anyone knew what she wanted. He gave me this tired, hollow look. "If you ever find out, son, you let me know. But my advice? Don't go looking." I tried to take his advice. I really did. But once you see something like that, it doesn't let you go. I started noticing little things. Driving that stretch of road again on patrol, I'd catch myself checking the ditches more than I should, expecting to see her standing there. Sometimes I thought I did, just for a second, only for the pale blur to vanish when I blinked. At night, when I tried to sleep, I'd hear the crunch of gravel outside my window, faint footsteps that made me sit up in bed. Always nothing there when I looked. The worst part was the dreams. I'd dream of standing on that road, headlights burning, the woman staring at me. But in the dreams, she spoke. Her voice was dry, cracked, like wind through dead leaves. She'd say my name, over and over, like she'd been waiting for me all along. I woke up some mornings with my sheets twisted tight around me, my heart pounding. And every time I told myself I was done thinking about her. I'd let it go, but I couldn't. The final straw came one night when dispatch sent me out on a welfare check near County 9. A farmer had called in, said he heard crying outside his house. I pulled up the long gravel drive, my headlights sweeping across the porch. The farmer met me at the door, nervous, pale. He said the crying had been right outside his window. A woman's voice, soft and broken. When he went out with a flashlight, no one was there. I searched the property, nothing. But on my way back to the cruiser, I spotted something in the dirt. Bare footprints, small, leading away from the house toward the road. I followed them with my flashlight. They led me right to the shoulder of County Road 9. And then, they just stopped. I stood there in the dark, the fields stretching out on either side, the night air so still it felt suffocating. My light shook in my hand as I scanned the roadside, half praying she wouldn't be there, and for once she wasn't. Just the empty road and the sound of my own breathing. But I knew she'd been there. I knew she'd come closer. I didn't tell the farmer what I thought. Just said it was probably a prank, some kids messing around. He nodded, but I could see in his eyes he didn't believe me. He'd grown up here. He knew the stories. Back in the cruiser, I sat with the engine idling, staring down that long, black road. I thought about Emily Carter, missing since 1979, her case file collecting dust in some archive. I thought about how many people had seen her since. Deputies, farmers, drivers passing through, always the same woman, always the same nightgown, always waiting on County 9. And I thought about Sheriff Dalton's words, "Don't ever stop for her again." But here's the thing. When you're out there in the dark, alone, and you see her standing in your headlights, you do stop. You can't help it, because some part of you hopes maybe this time she'll tell you why. I tried to let it go. After. The footprints at the farmer's house, after the dreams, after the warnings from Dalton and Rogers, I told myself I was finished. No more late-night digging through records. No more driving that road unless I had to. But the truth is, County Road 9 was always there, waiting. And sooner or later, every night shift takes you down it. It was about a month later when it happened again. I remember because the air had turned cold, that first sharp bite of winter in the wind. My windows fogged easier. My breath hung in the cab like smoke. I was running routine patrol, headlights cutting across the dark, when I saw her. She was standing in the same place. Same pale dress, same long hair hanging loose, like time hadn't moved at all since the first night I saw her, but this time, she wasn't looking past me. She was facing the road head on, her chin slightly raised. I should have kept driving. Every nerve in me told me not to stop. But my foot pressed the brake anyway. The cruiser slowed, tires crunching on gravel. My hand hovered on the gear shift, and before I realized it, I was pulling over. I sat there with the engine idling, staring at her through the windshield. She wasn't blurry in the headlights this time. She was clear, too clear. I rolled the window down an inch. The night air poured in, cold enough to sting my lungs. "Ma'am?" I called. My voice sounded too loud against the silence. "Do you need help?" She didn't answer. I turned on the spotlight, sweeping it across her. And for the first time, I saw her face fully. My heart stopped. It wasn't just some stranger. It wasn't just the face from a newspaper clipping. It was someone I knew. Her features were older, sharper, but I recognized her instantly, Emily Carter. I hadn't just seen her photo in the archives. I'd seen her before, in real life. When I was a kid, maybe 8 or 9, my family lived near the Carters. My dad worked shifts with her uncle at the mill. Emily was older than me, maybe a teenager at the time, but I remembered her. She used to wave when we rode our bikes past her yard. She'd laugh with her friends on the porch, that easy light sound you don't forget. That was before she vanished. I remember my mom whispering about it at the kitchen table, saying how awful it was, how the poor Carter family must be losing their minds. I remember seeing the missing posters tacked up on telephone poles, her smiling face in black and white, and now here she was, standing barefoot on the road 40 years later, looking exactly the same. My hands went cold on the wheel. I whispered, almost without meaning to. "Emily?" Her head tilted slightly like she heard me. And then, God help me, she smiled. Not the empty, wrong smile I'd seen before. This was softer, sadder, like she knew me too. I got out of the cruiser before I could stop myself. The gravel crunched under my boots and every step felt heavier than the last. I wanted to speak, but my throat was dry. My flashlight beam shook in my hand as I brought it up. Her eyes followed me now. No more staring past me. No more vacant emptiness. She was looking right at me. Up close, she looked almost alive. Her skin was pale, yes, but I could see the faint flush of color in her cheeks. Her breath fogged in the cold. I was 10 feet away when I stopped. "Emily," I said again, louder this time. My voice cracked. "It's me. You used to live near us. Do you remember?" She blinked slowly. Then her lips parted. For the first time, she spoke. Her voice was thin, fragile, but clear enough to hear. "I never came home." The words made my stomach twist. I wanted to ask her 100 questions. Where she went, what happened that night, why she was still here. But the words died on my tongue. Because even as she stood there, even as I heard her voice, something in me knew this wasn't right. I looked at her feet, still bare, still torn and bloody, just like before. The cuts never healed. Her dress moved in the wind, but her hair didn't. Not even a strand. I forced myself to take a step back. "Emily, what do you want from me?" Her expression didn't change, but her eyes darkened somehow. The way storm clouds roll in, swallowing the light. "I want you to see," she whispered. Before I could ask what she meant, the radio on my shoulder hissed to life. "Unit 7, do you copy?" I jumped at the sound, heart hammering. My hand shot to the mic. "Go ahead." Got a call just came in. Woman seen walking near County Road 9. White dress. Caller says she looks lost. My skin went ice cold. I turned my head back to Emily, but she was gone. The road was empty. The spotlight shone across the ditch and the trees. Nothing, just silence pressing in from every direction. I stood there frozen, the radio still crackling faintly in my ear. My pulse roared so loud I could hardly think. I climbed back into the cruiser, locked the doors without even realizing it, and sat gripping the wheel with shaking hands. I told dispatch I checked the area, no contact. Same line as always. Then I drove, faster than I should have. Headlights cutting sharp through the dark, my eyes darting to the mirrors every few seconds. Back at the station, I didn't tell anyone. How could I? How do you say, "I saw a missing woman from my childhood"? She spoke to me, called herself Emily, then vanished into thin air. They'd call me crazy. Maybe I was crazy. But that night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop replaying her words. I never came home. I dreamed again. In the dream, I was a kid riding my bike past her yard. Emily waved just like she used to, but this time her smile faltered. Her eyes filled with something I couldn't name. Fear, sadness? She mouthed something. Words I couldn't hear. And then her image flickered, like a TV losing signal. 1 second she was there, the next she was gone, and I was left pedaling past an empty house. I woke up shaking, my pillow damp with sweat. I tried to steady myself, but the truth gnawed at me. Emily Carter wasn't just some ghost story. She wasn't just a pale woman on the roadside. She had a name, a history, a family. And for some reason, after all these years, she'd shown herself to me not once, not twice, but 3 times now, and I couldn't stop asking myself why. Why me? What did she want me to see? I've worked in law enforcement long enough to know that every town carries its secrets. Some are written in old files, some whispered over coffee at the diner, and some sit heavy in the walls of the places we walk every night. For us, that place was the old wing of the county jail. It had been sealed off years before I started. A flood in the early 90s ruined the lower cells, and the county never found the budget to fix them. The official line was that it was unsafe. The floors had buckled, mold had crept in, and the plumbing was long gone. But there were always rumors, the kind that sounded half like jokes and half like warnings. Deputies who'd been around long enough said they heard things when they worked the night shift. Chains dragging, voices echoing through pipes that had been shut off for decades. I never put much stock in it. I thought it was just the way small towns keep themselves entertained. But one night I found myself standing in front of the heavy rusted door, the one that led into that drowned wing, with a flashlight in my hand and my partner waiting behind me. It started with a noise. We were both sitting at the desk, half asleep over paperwork when the call came over the intercom. It wasn't a dispatcher, It was the old jail system itself, the one no one used anymore. It hissed and crackled, and then there was the faintest sound of water dripping. Not just once, not random. A steady rhythm, almost like footsteps in water. My partner Ruiz frowned and looked at me. "You hear that?" he asked. I nodded, but I didn't want to admit how much it unsettled me. The system shouldn't have been working at all. That wing had been disconnected. Still, procedure is procedure. If there's a noise inside a county facility, you check it. So we grabbed our lights, our radios, and the old brass key that still fit the swollen lock on the jail wing. The smell hit me first. Damp concrete and rot. Thick enough that it sat heavy in the back of my throat. The kind of smell you never quite get out of your clothes. When the door groaned open, the air that spilled out was colder than the hallway behind us. Like stepping into a basement that hadn't seen light in years. We stepped inside. The beam of my flashlight cut across peeling paint and rusted bars. The floor was slick, uneven. Water pooled in places, shallow but murky, reflecting the light like broken glass. Somewhere deep inside, I heard that same dripping sound again, steady and measured. "Looks like a busted pipe," Ruiz muttered, though I could hear the unease in his voice. He was trying to sound casual, but his hand rested on his holster as we moved deeper. I tried to focus on the logical explanation. Old buildings make noise. Water moves through hidden spaces. Sound carries. But the farther we walked, the more wrong it all felt. The dripping didn't echo like it should have. It sounded close. Always close. Even when my light showed nothing but empty corridors and black water stretching out between the cells. We passed the first row. Rust had eaten through the bars. The cots inside were little more than frames covered in mold. Graffiti scrawled across the walls, words I couldn't make out beneath layers of grime. Some cells looked like they'd been abandoned in a rush, with rotting blankets and overturned buckets still in the corners. I remember pausing at one, shining my light across the back wall. There were scratch marks, long frantic grooves torn into the concrete. "Rats," Ruiz said quickly. But they weren't rat marks. I'd seen plenty of those before. These were too wide, too desperate, like someone had clawed at the wall with bleeding fingers. I told myself not to look too long. We kept walking. The deeper we went, the louder that sound grew. Water sloshing, dripping. At one point, I could swear I heard a second noise layered beneath it. Something faint, like a voice echoing from behind the walls. "Do you hear that?" I asked quietly. Ruiz stopped. His flashlight beam trembled just slightly on the wet floor. "No," he said, "too fast." Too certain. I didn't press him. By the time we reached the far end of the corridor, the water was ankle deep, cold, soaking into my boots. Every step echoed. The smell was worse there, sharp and sour. My light flickered across a cell door half submerged in the flood. The bars bent outward, like something inside had pushed until the metal gave way. That was when the sound stopped. No more dripping, no more sloshing, just silence, so heavy it pressed down on my chest. I raised my light toward the open doorway of that flooded cell. For a second, I thought I saw movement, a pale shape just beneath the surface of the water. But when I leaned closer, the light only showed ripples. Ruiz grabbed my arm. "We're done," he muttered. His voice was low, tense. "There's nothing here." I wanted to agree. I wanted to leave right then, but something made me hesitate. Maybe it was duty. Maybe it was stubbornness. Or maybe it was the way the silence felt like it was waiting for me to turn my back. So I said, "One more check. Then we're out." I stepped closer to the open cell. The water lapped against the frame. My light swept across the walls inside, catching on more scratches, more stains I didn't want to name. And then, from deep inside the flooded dark, came the sound again. Not dripping this time. Not water. It was a breath. Long, slow, dragging air through lungs that shouldn't have been there. I froze. My light trembled across the water, and for just a heartbeat, I thought I saw eyes staring back at me. Two pale circles just above the surface. I blinked, and they were gone. The breath stopped. Ruiz was already backing away, his boots splashing through the water. "Now," he hissed. "We're leaving. Now." I followed him, though every step felt like I was moving through molasses. The silence clung to us until we reached the door. until we shoved it shut with all the strength we had. The clang of metal echoed through the hall, and only then did I let out the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. We never reported what we saw. Not really. The log just says, checked disturbance, no cause found. That's how it always goes. The county doesn't want stories. They want order, but I know what I heard. What I almost saw, and sometimes, when the station is quiet, I swear I can still hear it. That slow, dragging breath rising up through the pipes. Waiting. People like to think that fear comes from what you see, from shadows, figures, blood, or things that move in the dark. But I've learned it's not the sight of something that eats at you the most. It's the sound. The mind can argue with the eyes. It can tell itself, I saw wrong. It was a trick of the light, a reflection, nothing real. But sound goes deeper. You hear it with your body as much as your ears. You feel it in your bones, and once it's inside you, you can't get rid of it. That was the lesson the jail taught me the second time I went down there. It was about a week after the night Ruiz and I had checked the flooded cells. We'd locked the door, signed the log, and promised each other we wouldn't talk about what happened. He kept his word. I didn't. The memory gnawed at me, and I couldn't just let it sit. I started asking around. Old-timers, retired deputies, even one of the jailers who'd worked there back before the flood. Most brushed me off, but I noticed the way their faces changed when I mentioned the sealed wing. Their eyes shifted, their mouths tightened, like they knew more than they'd ever say out loud. One old jailer finally gave me something. He was drinking coffee outside the diner when I asked, and he leaned close like he didn't want anyone else to hear. "Don't go back down there," he whispered. "It's not just the water. It's the voices. Once you hear them, they don't let go." I wanted to ask more, but he stood up, dumped his cup, and walked away like the conversation never happened. I told myself I wouldn't go back. I really did. But then came another night shift, another strange call. Not through the intercom this time, through the pipes. We were sitting in the squad room when it started. A faint sound like someone whispering through a vent. At first I thought it was the wind. But there was no wind that night. The air was still, heavy. Ruiz heard it too. I could see the way he stiffened, his pen frozen halfway across the page. The voice was muffled, words slipping in and out, but I swear I heard my name. Deputy, just like that. Clear as day. I looked at Ruiz and he shook his head hard. "Ignore it," he muttered. "Don't listen. But once you hear your own name, how do you ignore it?" We argued for a few minutes, but I finally wore him down. We grabbed our lights again, and for the second time I unlocked that swollen metal door. The air inside was colder, wetter. The stink of rot seemed thicker, like the place had been holding its breath since the last time we left and was now exhaling straight into our lungs. We stepped into ankle-deep water, flashlights cutting across rusted bars and black corners. At first it was quiet, except for the drip, drip, drip from somewhere deeper in. Then came the voices, not one this time, many. They rose from the walls, from the pipes overhead, from the black mouths of empty cells. Men and women both, some clear, some just a rasp. Some screamed, long and raw, like their throats were tearing. Others whispered low, quick words too soft to understand. And all of it layered together, rising and falling, weaving through the corridor like a tide. I stopped dead, frozen in the water. Ruiz grabbed my sleeve. "It's nothing," he said, his voice breaking. "Old plumbing, echoes, that's all." But I could hear words in them. Words I shouldn't have been able to. "Help me. Don't leave. They never let me out." I shined my light into a cell on the left. The mattress inside was black with mold, the blankets eaten by time. But the voice was coming from there, I swear it. A man's voice, rough, begging. I took a step closer, my boots splashing in the water. The voice grew louder. "Please, I'm still here." The cell was empty. I swung my light to the next one. Another voice. This time a woman's, sobbing softly, words breaking apart. They locked me in. The cell was empty too. Just scratches on the wall, deeper than the ones I'd seen before. Everywhere I turned, the voices followed. Sometimes screaming, sometimes whispering, always from the empty cells. Always begging, pleading, accusing. Ruiz finally snapped. He shouted into the dark, his voice booming against the concrete. "Shut up! Just shut the hell up!" The voices stopped. All at once. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. My skin crawled, every hair standing on end. I could hear my own breath, fast and shaky, the water dripping from my boots. Then, in the silence, one last voice spoke. Not from a cell, not from the pipes. From directly behind me, it whispered my full name. Slowly, clearly. I spun around, light slashing across the corridor, but there was nothing there. Just water and rust and darkness stretching behind us. Ruiz grabbed my arm. His face was pale, his jaw tight. "We're done," he said. His voice was low, like he was afraid the walls might hear him. "You hear me? We're not coming back down here. Ever." I didn't argue this time. We left fast, water sloshing with every step. The beam of my light shaking so bad I could barely keep it steady. When we shoved that heavy door closed, I swear I felt something on the other side push back for just a second. Not enough to stop it. Just enough to let us know it was there. We locked it, double-checked it, and went back to the squad room without saying a word. I tried to sleep when my shift ended, but I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the voices again. Not all of them, just the one. The one that whispered my name in the dark. I tell myself it was just echoes, old pipes, the brain trying to make patterns out of nonsense. But even now, sitting here years later, I can hear it sometimes when I'm alone. The sound doesn't fade. It waits. Most people think police work is about what's happening right now. Arrests, reports, traffic stops. But the truth is, half the job lives in paperwork. Old files, old cases, things that get buried in boxes until someone bothers to look. I learned that the hard way after those nights in the flooded wing. Ruiz refused to talk about it again. He shut down the moment I mentioned the voices, the whispers, the way something had said my name. He told me flat out that if I wanted to keep chasing shadows, I'd be doing it alone, but I couldn't let it go. Not after what I heard. Not after the way the silence felt like it was waiting for us to leave. So I started digging. The jail kept its records in the basement of the courthouse. Shelves stacked with dusty boxes, old ledgers, half-missing logs that no one had touched in years. The air down there was thick with mildew, the kind of damp smell that seeps into everything. The single light overhead buzzed and flickered like it might give out at any second. I told myself I was just killing time. Just curious. But deep down I knew I was looking for something. Proof. At first it was nothing but routine files. Arrest logs, court dates, transfers. Most of the records stopped right around the year the old wing was closed. Pages were water-stained, ink blurred into nothing, whole entries eaten through by mold. But the more I dug, the more I noticed gaps. Whole stretches of names were crossed out. Some boxes were mislabeled, dates mixed up, entire case numbers missing, like someone had gone out of their way to make sure the trail didn't lead anywhere. I almost gave up until I found a binder shoved behind a stack of property forms. The cover was warped, the metal rings bent, but inside were pages no one had meant for me to see. They weren't neat like the other files. They were handwritten, scrawled in rushed pen, dated around the early 90s. The first line I read made my stomach tighten. Flood reached lower cells. Evacuation failed. I flipped the page, scanning fast. Each note was worse than the last. Water came in fast. Bars blocked exit. Inmates trapped. Voices carried through the pipes all night. The handwriting grew shakier as it went on. Some sentences stopped halfway through, like the writer couldn't bring themselves to finish. And then I saw the list. Names. Dozens of them. Each one belonged to an inmate, with a date beside it. All the same day, all the same year the old wing had been sealed. I remember staring at the page, my hands going cold. Because if this was true, it meant the county hadn't just shut down a damaged part of the jail. They had buried a tragedy, a mass drowning, but there was no record of it anywhere else. No newspaper clippings, no official reports, nothing. It had been erased, covered up. The next pages were worse. Some of the names had notes beside them. Words that chilled me to the bone. Still heard crying after 3 days. Voices in the drains. Screams at night. can't sleep. I don't know how long I sat there, flipping page after page, my flashlight beam shaking across the paper. The deeper I went, the clearer it became. Whoever kept these notes hadn't just been recording facts. They were confessing. One line stuck with me. They said the cells filled faster than we could get keys. But I hear them still. I think they know we left them. I had to stop. My throat was dry, my chest tight. I shoved the binder shut and sat there in the dark basement trying to breathe. But when I finally looked up, I realized I wasn't alone. At first, I thought it was just the sound of the building. Old pipes, old wood settling. But then I heard it clearer. A low murmur coming from the shelves themselves. I stood up fast, my chair scraping across the concrete. The whisper cut off. The silence was crushing. I grabbed the binder, stuffed it under my arm, and left without looking back. Back at the station, I locked myself in the report room and opened it again, forcing myself to keep reading. My hands shook with every page, but I couldn't stop. One entry described a night after the floodwaters had been drained. Deputies swore they still heard voices from the empty cells. Some thought it was air in the pipes. Others refused to go near the wing at all. Another entry mentioned dreams. Nightmares so vivid that deputies started requesting transfers just to escape them. The last entry was barely legible, words scribbled over each other in frantic loops. They want out. They won't stop. The water didn't take them. The jail keeps them. The sentence ended there. Ink dragged across the page like the pen had been torn away mid-stroke. I sat there staring at the last line until my eyes blurred. The room around me felt too quiet, too heavy. Every creak of the building made me jump. Finally, I closed the binder, shoved it into a drawer, and locked it. But even with it hidden away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd crossed a line. That the more I knew, the more dangerous it became. That night, when I tried to sleep, the voices came back. Not faint through pipes this time. Not muffled. Clear. They whispered from the corner of my room, from the shadows near the door. I couldn't make out every word, but I didn't need to. The tone was enough. Accusation, grief, anger. When I sat up, heart pounding, the whispering stopped. But on my nightstand, where I swear I'd left nothing, there was a small damp stain. Like a drop of water had fallen from nowhere. I didn't sleep again until morning. The next day, I tried to tell Ruiz what I'd found. I thought maybe if he saw the binder, he'd finally admit what we'd both experienced. But when I brought it up, his face went hard. "Don't," he said. His voice was sharp, almost desperate. "Don't show me. Don't say another word. You don't understand. If you dig, they'll notice you." That was the first time I realized he wasn't just scared. He was protecting himself. He knew more than he'd ever admit. And the only way he could survive was by pretending none of it was real. But I'd already opened the door. And once you hear the voices, once you see their names written in black ink, there's no going back. Even now I can still picture that list. Dozens of names, each one belonging to someone who never got out of those cells. Each one a person the county erased. And I wonder, how many of them whisper at night? How many of them press their hands against the bars as the water rose, waiting for help that never came? How many still wait? Some places don't let you leave. Not really. You can lock the doors, throw away the keys, and bury the memories under layers of reports and silence. But the place itself waits. It waits for the moment you come back. I told myself I was done with the old wing. After the binder, after the names, after the voices followed me home, I swore I'd never set foot down there again. But the jail has a way of drawing you back in, like it knows when you've been marked. It happened on another night shift. Ruiz and I were alone in the squad room when we heard it again. Not whispers this time, not screams, a splash. It echoed through the vents, sharp and heavy, like someone had stepped into water. Ruiz went rigid. His eyes flicked toward the hallway, then toward me. "No," he said flatly. Not again, but the sound came again. A step, then another. The slosh of water being pushed aside, closer and closer. It was impossible. The old wing was sealed. No one should have been inside. And yet, the noise carried through the building like it was just down the hall. I didn't even have to say it. Ruiz saw the look on my face and shook his head. "You're not dragging me back in there." But duty isn't always a choice. If there's movement in a county facility, you check it. That's what the book says. And maybe a part of me wanted proof. Something to make sense of the whispers, the binder, the stains of water that showed up where they shouldn't. So I grabbed my flashlight. This time, Ruiz followed, but I could see his hand trembling near his holster the whole way down. The door groaned open, and the smell hit me like a wall, damp, rotten, thick. Water sloshed against the concrete as if the place had been filling and emptying on its own, like a tide no one could predict. We stepped inside. The air was colder than last time. My boots sank into water that was deeper now, up to my shins. The beam of my light shook as I moved it across the cells. Everything looked worse. Rust eaten through the bars, black streaks crawling down the walls, ceilings dripping in steady streams, and then we heard it. Not just splashing now, breathing. Slow. Wet breaths rising and falling in the dark ahead of us. Ruiz froze, his face drained of color. I wanted to say something, to tell him it was just echoes, but the lie caught in my throat. The sound wasn't bouncing off walls. It was steady, measured, alive. We followed it down the corridor, each step sinking deeper into the water. My heart pounded in my ears, but some force kept me moving. I felt like I was being pulled, drawn forward whether I wanted to go or not. The sound grew louder, breathing, dripping, a faint ripple spreading across the water ahead. And then at the far end of the hall, my light caught something, a figure. It stood waist-deep in the water, motionless. The beam of my flashlight trembled over it, and what I saw is burned into my mind forever. It wasn't clear. The water distorted it, shadows breaking across its body, but I could see enough. Shoulders hunched forward. Arms pale against the dark, the outline of a head tilted low, as if it were watching us from beneath dripping strands of hair. It didn't move. It just stood there, waiting. For a long time, none of us breathed. Ruiz gripped my arm so hard it hurt. "Don't shine the light on it," he whispered, his voice cracking. But I couldn't look away. My beam stayed locked on that figure, frozen in place, half swallowed by the black water. And then it shifted, not much. Just the tilt of its head, the faint ripple of its arms brushing against the surface. But it was enough to tell me it wasn't a trick of the eyes. It wasn't shadows or rust. It was something standing there, alive, or something like alive. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Who's there?" I called out, though my voice came out thin, barely carrying down the corridor. No answer. Just that slow breathing. Ruiz tugged at me, desperate to leave, but my legs wouldn't move. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I turned my back, if I left that thing behind without knowing, it would follow me. So I took one step closer. The water rippled. The figure straightened just slightly, head lifting. I caught a flash of its face, pale against the dark, but the features were blurred, washed out, like they didn't belong to anyone fully human anymore. And then it spoke. Not loud. Not even clear. Just one word, whispered low, carried on the air between us. "Stay." I felt my stomach twist, cold spreading through my chest like ice. It wasn't a request. It was a command. A promise. Ruiz yanked me back so hard I nearly fell. "We're leaving," he hissed, his voice sharp, panicked. Now, the figure didn't move as we backed away. Didn't chase. Didn't speak again. It just stood there, waist deep in the black water, its head following us as we retreated. By the time we shoved the heavy door shut and locked it, Ruiz was shaking so badly he could barely hold the key. He wouldn't look at me, wouldn't speak. He just sat down at the desk, pale as a ghost, staring at the wall like if he blinked, he'd see that figure again. I wanted to believe it was all in my head. That fear had twisted shadows into something more. But the next morning, when I pulled off my boots, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. They were wet all the way up to my knees, as if I'd waded into water deeper than I remembered. But I hadn't. I knew I hadn't. Which means the water had risen higher. And whatever stood waist deep at the far end of that corridor was closer to me than I realized. I didn't tell Ruiz. I didn't tell anyone. Some things don't belong in reports because putting them into words makes them more real. But I know what I saw. The drowned don't stay buried in that jail. They stand. They wait. They breathe in the dark, and sometimes they whisper for you to stay. And the worst part is, I think part of me wanted to. Night shifts can make you hear things. The building creaks, the radios crackle, and before long your tired brain starts to play tricks on you. At least that's what I used to think. Back then I worked midnights at the sheriff's office, the kind of shifts that seemed to drag on forever. Most nights were dead quiet. No calls, no drunks, no movement on the roads. Just me, a few deputies out on patrol, and the sound of the dispatch radio humming in the background. That hum is something you get used to. It's steady, almost like white noise. And when the dispatcher calls, their voice cuts through that hum, clear and sharp. You come to depend on it. In a way, it feels like a lifeline, but then something changed. It started with little things. A call would come through, but when the deputy answered back, dispatch would act confused, saying they hadn't called in the first place. We all brushed it off as static, maybe interference from another channel bleeding over, but the calls kept happening. The first night I noticed it myself. I was alone in the squad room, staring at the computer screen, trying to stay awake. The radio crackled and I heard a woman's voice, soft, calm, almost too calm. Unit 7, check the old mill road. I frowned. There was no Unit 7, at least not anymore. That call sign hadn't been used since before my time. I picked up the mic and asked dispatch to repeat. The real dispatcher came back, her voice different, higher, brisker. Negative, we didn't transmit. I sat there with the radio in my hand, my pulse quickening. I knew what I heard. That wasn't static. That wasn't bleed over. It was a woman, clear as day, giving an order. I didn't say anything to the others that night. They'd just laugh, tell me I was tired. But a few nights later, Ruiz came back from patrol, pale as chalk. He slammed his cruiser keys on the desk and muttered, "She sent me to an address that doesn't exist." I asked him what he meant, and he looked at me like I should already know. She told me to check a disturbance out on County Line Road. Gave me a house number. I drove the whole stretch. There's nothing there. Nothing but trees. I didn't even have to ask who she was. The worst part was I could see the fear in him. Ruiz wasn't the type to scare easy, but whatever voice he'd heard on that radio had gotten under his skin. From then on, it wasn't just once in a while. It became regular. The Phantom Dispatcher, because that's what we started calling it, would cut in during the quietest hours of the night. Always the same calm tone, always giving orders that didn't make sense. Unit 4, respond to the water tower. Unit 9, check the bridge. Unit 2, return to the old wing. The places she mentioned were never right. Some were abandoned. Some were gone entirely. Once she told a deputy to check an intersection that had been closed off for 10 years. And always, when we asked the real dispatcher, she swore she hadn't said a word. I started paying closer attention. The phantom voice never spoke during the day, only at night. Always after midnight, usually when things were at their deadest. And there was something about her tone. It wasn't just calm. It was cold, detached, like she was repeating words she didn't fully understand. One night, I recorded it. I set my phone by the radio and let it run while I did paperwork. Sure enough, around 2 a.m. she came through. Unit 5, respond to the tracks. Possible trespasser. I snatched up the recorder, my hand shaking. I knew what I'd caught, proof. But when I played it back, the recording was empty. Just static, no voice, no call. It was like she didn't want to be recorded. I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't tell anyone. I was afraid they'd think I was losing it. But I wasn't the only one. Other deputies started reporting the same thing. Some refused to acknowledge it out loud, but you could see it in their faces when the radio crackled at the wrong time of night. They'd stiffen, eyes darting, waiting for the voice, and sure enough, she'd come. One deputy swore the voice used his name, not his call sign, his actual name. She told him, "Mark, check the field." He was so shaken he nearly wrecked his cruiser pulling over. That was when I realized it wasn't random. She knew us. She wasn't guessing. She was speaking directly to us one by one. The strangest thing happened about a month in. I was covering the desk when the radio went silent, the usual hum cutting off completely. I tapped the speaker thinking it died, but then her voice came through. Not a call sign this time. Not an order. Just one sentence. "You shouldn't be here." The words slid through me like ice. For a second I couldn't breathe. I wanted to throw the mic across the room, but my hand wouldn't let go. And then the hum came back, and it was like nothing had happened. I didn't tell anyone about that one. Not Ruiz, not dispatch, no one. Some words feel heavier when you say them out loud, like they take on more weight. But after that, I couldn't shake the thought. Whoever she was, or whatever she was, she didn't just haunt the radio. She was watching us. The deputies started dreading night shifts. Some traded to avoid them. A couple even put in transfer requests. The sheriff brushed it all off as stress, fatigue, too much caffeine. But I could see the cracks forming, and I wasn't doing much better. Every time the radio hissed, my chest tightened. My ears strained for that wrong voice. I'd dream about it too. Dreams where I was in my cruiser, driving down endless back roads, the radio calling me to places I couldn't find. Always her voice. Always calm. Always waiting. The last night I heard her, I was alone again. Ruiz was out and dispatch was quiet. I was just sitting there, staring at the clock when the hum cut out. My stomach dropped. I knew what was coming. The radio crackled and she spoke. Unit 5. My call sign. I froze. Unit 5, respond to your home. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Then she repeated it, slower this time. Unit 5. Return to your home. My hand shook so hard I almost dropped the mic. I couldn't answer. I didn't dare. When Ruiz came back an hour later, I was still sitting there, staring at the dead radio. He asked if something was wrong, but I couldn't form the words. Because I knew what she meant. She didn't mean my house. She meant something else. Some other home. And the part of me I don't admit to anyone. The part I keep. Buried. Knows exactly where she wanted me to go, back to the places she's been calling us to. The empty bridges. The abandoned towers. The places no one goes anymore. That's her home. And she's still waiting for me to return. After weeks of hearing that voice on the radio, I started to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. The other deputies felt it too. You could see it in their eyes. None of us wanted to admit it, but we all knew something was wrong. The sheriff didn't want to hear it. He said it was just interference, maybe kids with scanners messing with us. But scanners don't sound like that. Scanners don't use call signs. We retired decades ago. Scanners don't know your name. It got to the point where I dreaded sitting at the desk. Every time the radio went quiet for too long, my chest would tighten, waiting for that voice to break in, waiting for her. And then one night I found something. It was during a quiet shift, maybe 2 in the morning. I was digging through an old metal cabinet in the records room, looking for some training files. The drawers were jammed with old reports, logs, boxes that hadn't been touched in years. And at the bottom, shoved behind a stack of faded paperwork, I found a cardboard box marked Communications Archive. Inside were cassette tapes. Dozens of them. Old dispatch recordings from the 80s and 90s, back when everything was kept on reels or cassettes. Most of them were labeled with dates and shifts. Some had smudged ink, hard to read. I don't know why, but something pulled me toward them. Maybe I was just desperate for answers. I carried the box back to the desk, found an old tape player in the storage closet, and started listening. The first few tapes were normal. Static, call-ins, dispatchers giving out routine traffic stops, noise complaints, all the usual stuff. The voices were different back then, a little more formal, but nothing strange. But then I hit a tape from 1991. The label read March 14th, night. And when I pressed play, my blood ran cold, because I heard her. That same calm, measured voice. The one we'd been hearing on our radios for weeks. Clear as day, giving out assignments just like she did to us. Unit 3, respond to 45 highway. Vehicle in the ditch. Unit 2, check disturbance, East Miller Street. I sat frozen in my chair, headphones pressed to my ears. It was the same tone. The same way she said the call signs. The little pauses in between words. The phantom dispatcher. Only this wasn't phantom. This was real. This was recorded 30 years ago. I listened for an hour, my skin crawling the whole time. There was no mistaking it. It was her. I flipped the tape over. Near the end, I heard something else. There was shouting. A deputy screaming for backup. Dispatch, her voice trying to respond, but the signal was cutting out. Then static. Then silence. And then, faintly, someone else speaking on the line. A different dispatcher, a man. His voice was panicked. Control to all units. Dispatcher down. I repeat, dispatcher down! Officer involved incident at the comm center. I sat there staring at the tape player, my hands trembling. Dispatcher down. I pulled another tape from the box. This one was dated a week later. Different voice. A woman this time, but not her. I checked 3-4 more tapes from the months that followed. None of them had her voice. It hit me like a weight pressing down on my chest. The voice we'd been hearing all this time belonged to a real person. A dispatcher who died in the line of duty. Her name wasn't written on the tapes, but I knew I could find her. The next day, I dug through old personnel files. It took hours, but finally I found it. A report from 1991. Dispatcher killed during a domestic call gone wrong. Suspect stormed the comm center, shot her through the glass before fleeing. Her name was Elaine Rivers. I sat there in the records room staring at that name until it didn't feel real anymore. Elaine Rivers. The phantom voice wasn't a phantom at all. She'd been one of us, and somehow she still was. When I told Ruiz what I found, he wouldn't even look me in the eye. He just shook his head and muttered, "Don't tell the others. Just let it go." But how could I let it go? Every night I sat there, and her voice cut through the silence, calling units that didn't exist, sending us to places that weren't real. Knowing now that she had been a dispatcher, our dispatcher, made it worse, because it meant she wasn't some random ghost. She was tied to us, to this office, to the radios themselves. I couldn't stop thinking about the tape where the deputy screamed for backup. I wondered if she blamed herself for not being able to get the call through. Maybe she died thinking she'd failed. Maybe that's why she never left. The next time she spoke on the radio, I almost answered. It was around 1 a.m. She cut in, smooth as always. Unit 5, return to base. We're waiting. For a second, I raised the mic. My thumb hovered over the button. I wanted to ask her why. Why us? Why now? Why wouldn't she rest? But I couldn't. Something in me said not to. That if I answered, it would make things worse. Still, that silence weighed on me. She was out there trying to talk, and we were pretending she didn't exist. Maybe that's why she kept pushing harder. A week later, I went back to the tapes. This time I listened from the beginning of 1991. And I noticed something. The night she died, the tape cut out after the deputy screamed. But before the silence, right before the static, I swear I heard her voice again. Not giving an order, not calling a unit, just whispering. I replayed it a dozen times. It was faint, distorted, but I know what I heard. She said, "Don't leave me here." My skin prickled all over. It was like she'd been trapped in the radio itself, frozen in the last words she ever tried to say. And now every night she was still trying. I stopped listening after that. I couldn't take it. Every tape felt heavier, like I was pulling her closer each time I pressed play. But the damage was already done. I knew too much. And once you know you can't unhear her, the others, they still try to ignore it. They flinch when the wrong voice cuts in, but they force themselves to carry on. Pretend it's nothing. Me? I can't pretend. Because when Elaine speaks now, I don't just hear a ghost. I hear the weight of 30 years of silence. I hear someone who's been calling out across dead frequencies, waiting for someone to answer. And every night, her voice sounds a little clearer, like she's getting closer. The last shift before my days off, she spoke again. The room was empty except for me. The radio hissed, the hum dropped, and there she was. "Unit 5, my call sign." I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Then she repeated it, slower this time. "Unit 5, return to your home." My hand shook so hard I almost dropped the mic. I couldn't answer. I didn't dare. When Ruiz came back an hour later, I was still sitting there, staring at the dead radio. He asked if something was wrong, but I couldn't form the words, because I knew what she meant. She didn't mean my house. She meant something else, some other home, and the part of me I don't admit to anyone, the part I keep buried, knows exactly where she wanted me to go. Back to the places she's been calling us to. The empty bridges, the abandoned towers, the places no one goes anymore. That's her home, and she's still waiting for me to return. After weeks of hearing that voice on the radio, I started to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. The other deputies felt it too. You could see it in their eyes. None of us wanted to admit it, but we all knew something was wrong. The sheriff didn't want to hear it. He said it was just interference. Maybe kids with scanners messing with us. But scanners don't sound like that. Scanners don't use call signs we retired decades ago. Scanners don't know your name. It got to the point where I dreaded sitting at the desk. Every time the radio went quiet for too long, my chest would tighten, waiting for that voice to break in. Waiting for her. And then one night I found something. It was during a quiet shift, maybe 2 in the morning. I was digging through an old metal cabinet in the records room looking for some training files. The drawers were jammed with old reports, logs, boxes that hadn't been touched in years. And at the bottom, shoved behind a stack of faded paperwork, I found a cardboard box marked Communications Archive. Inside were cassette tapes. Dozens of them. Old dispatch recordings from the 80s and 90s, back when everything was kept on reels or cassettes. Most of them were labeled with dates and shifts. Some had smudged ink, hard to read. I don't know why, but something pulled me toward them. Maybe I was just desperate for answers. I carried the box back to the desk, found an old tape player in the storage closet, and started listening. The first few tapes were normal. Static, call-ins, dispatchers giving out routine traffic stops, noise complaints, all the usual stuff. The voices were different back then, a little more formal, but nothing strange. But then I hit a tape from 1991. The label read, March 14th, night. And when I pressed play, my blood ran cold, because I heard her, that same calm, measured voice, the one we'd been hearing on our radios for weeks. Clear as day, giving out assignments just like she did to us. Unit 3, respond to 45 highway, vehicle in the ditch. Unit 2, check disturbance, East Miller Street. I sat frozen in my chair, headphones pressed to my ears. It was the same tone. The same way she said the call signs, the little pauses in between words. The phantom dispatcher. Only this wasn't phantom. This was real. This was recorded 30 years ago. I listened for an hour, my skin crawling the whole time. There was no mistaking it. It was her. I flipped the tape over. Near the end, I heard something else. There was shouting. A deputy screaming for backup. Dispatch, her voice trying to respond, but the signal was cutting out. Then static. Then silence. And then faintly. Someone else speaking on the line. A different dispatcher. A man. His voice was panicked. Control to all units. Dispatcher down. I repeat, dispatcher down. Officer involved incident at the comm center. I sat there staring at the tape player, my hands trembling. Dispatcher down. I pulled another tape from the box. This one was dated a week later. Different voice. A woman this time, but not her. I checked 3-4 more tapes from the months that followed. None of them had her voice. It hit me like a weight pressing down on my chest. The voice we'd been hearing all this time belonged to a real person. A dispatcher who died in the line of duty. Her name wasn't written on the tapes, but I knew I could find her. The next day, I dug through old personnel files. It took hours, but finally I found it. A report from 1991. Dispatcher killed during a domestic call gone wrong. Suspect stormed the comm center, shot her through the glass before fleeing. Her name was Elaine Rivers. I sat there in the records room staring at that name until it didn't feel real anymore. Elaine Rivers. The phantom voice wasn't a phantom at all. She'd been one of us. And somehow, she still was. When I told Ruiz what I found, he wouldn't even look me in the eye. He just shook his head and muttered, "Don't tell the others. Just let it go." But how could I let it go? Every night I sat there, and her voice cut through the silence, calling units that didn't exist, sending us to places that weren't real. Knowing now that she had been a dispatcher, our dispatcher, made it worse, because it meant she wasn't some random ghost. She was tied to us, to this office, to the radios themselves. I couldn't stop thinking about the tape where the deputy screamed for backup. I wondered if she blamed herself for not being able to get the call through. Maybe she died thinking she'd failed. Maybe that's why she never left. The next time she spoke on the radio, I almost answered. It was around 1 a.m. She cut in, smooth as always. Unit 5, return to base. We're waiting. For a second, I raised the mic. My thumb hovered over the button. I wanted to ask her why. Why us? Why now? Why wouldn't she rest? But I couldn't. Something in me said not to. That if I answered, it would make things worse. Still, that silence weighed on me. She was out there trying to talk, and we were pretending she didn't exist. Maybe that's why she kept pushing harder. A week later, I went back to the tapes. This time I listened from the beginning of 1991, and I noticed something. The night she died, the tape cut out after the deputy screamed. But before the silence, right before the static, I swear I heard her voice again. Not giving an order, not calling a unit, just whispering. I replayed it a dozen times. It was faint, distorted, but I know what I heard. She said, "Don't leave me here." My skin prickled all over. It was like she'd been trapped in the radio itself, frozen in the last words she ever tried to say. And now, every night, she was still trying. I stopped listening after that. I couldn't take it. Every tape felt heavier, like I was pulling her closer each time I pressed play, but the damage was already done. I knew too much. And once you know, you can't unhear her. The others, they still try to ignore it. They flinch when the wrong voice cuts in, but they force themselves to carry on. Pretend it's nothing, me? I can't pretend. Because when Elaine speaks now, I don't just hear a ghost. I hear the weight of 30 years of silence. I hear someone who's been calling out across dead frequencies, waiting for someone to answer, and every night, her voice sounds a little clearer, like she's getting closer. The last shift before my days off, she spoke again. The room was empty except for me. The radio hissed, the hum dropped, and there she was. Unit 5. My call sign. I didn't move. Unit 5. Why did you leave me? I felt my stomach turn, bile rising in my throat. She wasn't calling me to some old road or an empty bridge. She was calling me to herself, and I knew, sooner or later, I'd have to answer. There are some calls that stick with you, no matter how many years pass. The kind you can still see every detail of when you close your eyes. For me, one of those calls came in just past midnight, early fall, when the air was starting to bite and the nights were longer than the days. The dispatcher's voice was calm, routine. She said someone had reported a vehicle parked out on Old Mill Road. No movement, no sign of anyone around, but the headlights had been shining into the cornfield for nearly an hour. At first, it sounded like nothing. People broke down all the time, pulled over to make a phone call, even just parked somewhere quiet when they didn't want to be seen. But something about her tone caught my attention. I could hear it in her voice. The caller hadn't just been concerned. They'd been uneasy. When I pulled up, I understood why. The car was still running. Headlights on, engine humming low. A four-door sedan, silver, sitting just on the edge of the dirt shoulder, angled slightly toward the corn. The driver's door was shut. No movement inside. I parked behind it, my cruiser lights throwing red and blue against the tall stalks. The night was quiet, too quiet. No insects, no rustling. Just the steady growl of that engine and the soft hiss of cooling metal. I walked up slow, hand brushing against the grip of my sidearm, without really thinking about it. I called out, asked if anyone was inside, but no one answered. When I reached the driver's side, I saw the keys still in the ignition. The radio was on low, static spilling through the speakers. The driver's seat was empty. It was the little details that got me. The air freshener swinging from the rearview mirror, a half-empty bottle of water in the cup holder, a phone charger plugged into the dash, cord dangling loose. Someone had been here, recently, and they hadn't just walked away to get help. I tried the door handle. It was unlocked. The smell that hit me was faint, but wrong. Not blood, not rot, just stale, like someone had been sitting there too long without moving. I clicked the radio on my shoulder, called it in. Ruiz was the closest unit, said he'd head over. While I waited, I took a slow walk around the car. That's when I saw it. The passenger door was cracked open just an inch or two, like someone had gotten out in a hurry, or didn't care to close it all the way. The grass along the edge of the field was bent, trampled, as if someone had walked straight into the corn. I stood there staring into that wall of stalks. Even in the dark, they looked alive somehow, the way they shifted with the slightest breeze. The headlights cut a narrow path into them, but it didn't show much. Just row after row disappearing into blackness. I don't know why, but I felt like if I stepped in, I wouldn't come back out. Ruiz showed up about 10 minutes later, his cruiser pulling in behind mine. He stepped out yawning, rubbing at his eyes, but when he saw the car, his expression changed. Still running? he asked. Yeah, I said. No sign of the driver. We both leaned into the car, checking glove box, center console. Nothing unusual. Registration matched a local address, a woman in her 30s. No purse, no wallet, no phone. Ruiz frowned at the open passenger door. Tracks go into the field, I saw. Neither of us said what we were both thinking. People don't just leave their cars running like that. Not with everything inside. We stood there a while, listening. It was so quiet it made my ears ring. I half expected to hear someone call for help, but there was nothing. Just corn swaying and the steady pulse of the car engine. Could be she wandered in, Ruiz said finally. Got disoriented. Or something chased her, I muttered before I could stop myself. Ruiz gave me a look. Not annoyed, just uneasy. You want to check it out? I didn't. Every part of me screamed not to. But duty is duty, and leaving someone out there wasn't an option. We grabbed flashlights and stepped to the edge of the field. The stalks rose high over our heads, thick and close, the kind of growth that swallows you whole. As soon as we pushed inside, the sound changed. Outside noise vanished, muffled. All I could hear was my own breathing and the crunch of dry stalks snapping under my boots. We followed the bent grass, the faint path where someone had forced their way through. It went maybe 20 yards, then stopped. Just ended. No more trampled stalks. No footprints in the dirt. Nothing. Ruiz swung his flashlight in a slow arc, his face pale in the beam. Where the hell did she go? I couldn't answer, because I didn't know. We stood there too long. The air between the stalks felt heavier, thicker. My light caught the edges of dried leaves, casting shadows that twitched and stretched like they were alive. Then Ruiz froze. You hear that? I held my breath. At first I heard nothing. Then, faint, carried on the wind, a whisper. Low, broken, impossible to understand. It came from deeper in the field. I shook my head. Could be the wind, but even as I said it, I knew it wasn't. We backed out slow. Neither of us wanted to admit we were spooked, but we were. When we broke back onto the road, the sound of the car engine felt almost comforting. Something normal in the middle of everything that wasn't. We decided to tow the car, log it as abandoned until we could reach the owner. But even as the tow truck hauled it away, I kept staring at that field. Something about it felt wrong. Like whatever went in there hadn't just disappeared. It was still in there, watching, waiting. Back at the office, we tried calling the registered owner's number. No answer. The address on file was an old rental. We sent someone to knock, but nobody was home. The report sat half-finished on my desk when I realized I'd made a mistake. The radio had still been on in the car. Static, faint but steady. When I leaned close, I thought I heard something beneath it. Not words exactly. More like breathing. I'd written it off at the time. But sitting in the quiet of the station, the memory hit me harder. What if she hadn't just vanished? What if something else had gotten into the car with her, and the only trace it left was a voice buried in static? I didn't tell Ruiz that part. He was already rattled. But the image of those headlights burning into the field, lighting up nothing but rows of corn and darkness, that stuck with me. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still see it. That endless wall of stalks, the shadows shifting inside, like something just out of sight. And I swear, even now, I can still hear the whisper. I should have left it alone. That night with the running car should have been nothing more than a strange call, filed away with the dozens of others that never get solved. But something about it wouldn't let me go. I kept thinking about the bent stalks. The whisper carried through the rows, the way the tracks just stopped like the earth had swallowed her whole. 3 nights later, we got another call. Different car, different stretch of road. Same story. A vehicle parked by the fields, lights on, doors open, but no driver in sight. This time, it wasn't just me and Ruiz. Dispatch sent a 3rd deputy, Miller, to meet us out there. Maybe they thought the extra set of hands would calm our nerves. It didn't. The car sat angled off the gravel shoulder, headlights spilling weak yellow beams into the field. The stalks swallowed most of the light, leaving only shadows between the rows. The night air was damp and colder than usual. My breath fogged when I spoke. We checked the vehicle. Same details. Keys left behind. Half-empty drink bottle in the console. No phone, no purse, no sign of a struggle. Miller crouched by the passenger side, squinting at the dirt. Tracks, he said. Fresh! The prince led straight into the corn. Big ones, heavy, maybe boots. Not a woman this time, a man. But like before, the stalks had been forced apart, and the path cut inward straight into the darkness. I don't know why we didn't call for more backup right then. Maybe pride. Maybe stupidity. Or maybe some part of us didn't want too many witnesses to whatever we were about to find. We took our flashlights and went in. The second you step into a cornfield at night, the world changes. The sound shifts. The stalks rub together with this dry, rasping noise that's almost like whispers. The air feels thicker, trapped. And the rows, they all look the same. You can turn in circles and never know which way you came. We followed the prince, moving single file, lights cutting narrow beams across the dirt. Every few steps I'd glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see the car's headlights fading behind us. But they were gone, swallowed by the stalks. After a while, Miller muttered, "We should have marked our path." He was right. Every row looked identical. Same broken stalks, same crunch of leaves underfoot. It was like walking in circles, though the prince told us otherwise. Then we heard it. A rustle. Ahead of us. Not the wind. Not an animal. Something heavier. Something keeping pace just beyond the reach of our lights. We froze, lights sweeping forward. "Nothing but corn. Hello?" Ruiz called out. His voice cracked more than he meant it to. "Sheriff's Department. If you're out there, say something." Silence. Then a whisper. Soft. Low. Too faint to make out the words. My stomach turned cold. It wasn't coming from one place. It was all around us. Like the stalks themselves were murmuring. Miller swung his light in wide arcs. "Someone's screwing with us," he muttered. "Has to be." But deep down, I didn't believe that. Neither did Ruiz. The prince carried on, deeper into the rows. We followed, slower now, every step deliberate. The rustling ahead of us continued, always just out of reach, like something wanted us to chase it. Minutes passed. Maybe more. Time felt strange in there. My legs ached, my throat dry, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. Then Ruiz hissed, "Hold up!" He knelt, shining his beam across the dirt. The prints we'd been following, they ended, just like before. The trail stopped dead in the middle of a row. No sign of turning, no scattered stalks, no jump to another path. It was like the man had been walking, then vanished into thin air. My chest tightened. I wanted to say something logical, something that made sense, but the words wouldn't come. That's when the sound came again. Rustling, but not ahead of us this time. Behind. We whipped our lights around. The rows were empty. But the stalks swayed, shifting, as if something had just moved through them. Miller cursed under his breath. "No way! No damn way!" We backed together, shoulder to shoulder, beams darting in every direction. The whispering grew louder. Not one voice now, many. Layered, tangled, like dozens of mouths breathing words just out of reach. "Stay calm," I muttered, though my own voice shook. The corn shivered, the sound circling us, tightening. My pulse hammered in my ears. I felt the weight of it pressing in, like the rows were closing. Ruiz snapped. He lifted his light and pushed forward, shoving into the stalks. "Hey, show yourself!" The whispering stopped. Dead silent. And that silence was worse than the sound. We stood frozen, barely breathing. My flashlight beam caught Miller's face, pale and wide-eyed, sweat running down his temple despite the cold. Ruiz stood rigid, his chest heaving. Then, from somewhere far off, we heard it. A scream, high, sharp, distant, human. We bolted toward it. No hesitation. The rows whipped at our arms and faces as we ran, flashlights bouncing. The scream cut off suddenly, swallowed by the field. When we reached the spot, there was nothing. No person, no prints. Just broken stalks pressed into the dirt as if someone had thrashed against them. Miller stood there panting, his hands trembling. "Where the hell did they go?" No one answered. I swept my light across the rows, desperate for anything. Clothes, blood, a phone, something. But there was nothing. Just corn and dirt and shadows that seemed to stretch too far. That's when Ruiz's radio crackled, a burst of static, sharp and violent. Then a voice. "Help!" Me. It was faint, garbled, a man's voice. Not any dispatcher I knew. Not anyone I'd ever heard on the radio before. We froze, staring at each other. Ruiz lifted the radio to his mouth, voice shaking. "Identify yourself." No reply. Just static, then clearer. "Behind you." We spun as one, lights cutting into the rows. Nothing, just endless stalks, rustling with some unseen breath. Miller swore and started backing away. "We need to get out. Now. I don't care what's out here." I wanted to argue, to insist we keep looking, but the words stuck in my throat. Deep down, I agreed with him. Whatever was in that field wasn't something we were trained to handle. We retraced our steps as best we could, or at least we tried. The rows twisted, turned, folded back on themselves. My sense of direction dissolved. Every row looked like the last. My light shook in my hand. At one point, I thought I saw movement, a shape darting between stalks, tall and thin. But when I swung my beam, it was gone. The whispers followed us. Always just at the edge of hearing. I tried to tell myself it was the wind, but the words were too deliberate, too human. Finally, after what felt like hours, the glow of headlights cut through the stalks. Our cruisers. We stumbled out onto the road, gasping like we'd surfaced from deep water. The car we'd come for was still there, engine running, lights burning steady. But the driver, the man whose prints we'd followed, was gone. Just like the woman before him, we towed the vehicle, wrote our reports, tried to explain it away as best we could, but nothing about it sat right. Later that night, when I was finally back home, I sat in the dark and thought about that voice on the radio. "Help me. Behind you. I keep wondering if it was him, the missing driver, trying to reach us, or if it was something else. Something using his voice, and the part that chills me most, if it knew where we were." What else did it know? I thought I'd gotten used to it. The abandoned cars, the footprints that led nowhere, the whispers in the corn. But the night we ran the plates on that second vehicle, that was the night it all became real. The car belonged to a family, a husband, a wife, and their 2 kids. They'd been reported missing only hours before we found the car sitting by the field. No signs of struggle, no damage, no reason for it to be there. Just headlights burning into the stalks like they'd been waiting for us. I remember standing by the hood, staring at the registration form Ruiz handed me. My hand shook when I read the names. It wasn't just one person gone this time. It was 4. 4 people who'd climbed out of that car and vanished into the field without leaving a trace. The part that unsettled me most was how ordinary they seemed. The father worked construction. The mother taught at the elementary school in town. The kids were young, a boy and a girl, 7 and 9. They weren't drifters. They weren't running from anything. They lived just 10 miles from that spot. And yet, they disappeared into the corn like smoke. We tried to follow procedure. We called it in, logged the details, marked the scene. But as the hours went by, I could feel the unease spreading through all of us. Miller avoided looking at the field. Ruiz kept pacing along the shoulder, shining his light between the stalks like he was expecting something to look back. Me? I couldn't stop picturing the kids. Little shoes pressing into the dirt, hands clutching their parents' sleeves as they stepped into those rows. And then, nothing. The search that followed was the largest I'd ever seen in our county. Deputies, volunteers, dogs, even a helicopter. They combed through the fields row by row, their flashlights cutting pale tunnels through the darkness. But every time the beams swung, the shadows seemed to bend back, swallowing everything. People kept saying the same thing. The field is too big, too dense. But I'd been in there. I knew the truth. It wasn't just size. It was something else. Something that shifted when you weren't looking. A place that didn't want you to find your way out. The dogs refused to go deep. They'd bark, growl, and then whimper, straining at their leashes until their handlers gave up. I stayed on the perimeter, scanning the rows. At one point, I thought I saw movement, small shapes darting between stalks. Kids. I was sure of it. I yelled, ran a few steps in, but the stalks closed around me, and the sound of my own breath filled my ears until I staggered back out. By dawn, the search was called off. Nothing found. No clothes, no bodies, not even prints beyond the first few yards. The sheriff gathered us and told us to keep it quiet. Not to spread fear, not to let the town think the fields were cursed. But you can't hide something like that. Everyone knew, everyone talked, and everyone started locking their doors at night, even the ones who'd never done it before. A few days later, I went back alone. I told myself it was about closure, about retracing the scene, maybe spotting something we'd missed. But deep down, I think I went because I couldn't stop hearing those whispers. I needed to know if they'd follow me again. The car was gone, towed to impound. Only the tire tracks remained, pressed into the dirt. I stood there for a long time, staring into the corn, listening. It was quiet at first, just the soft sway of stalks in the breeze. But after a while, I heard it. A faint rustle. Not from the wind, from movement, and then, layered under it, voices. High, fragile, like children. My chest tightened. I took one step into the rows, then another. My flashlight beam shook in my hand. The whispers grew clearer. A boy's voice. A girl's. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone. It was pleading. Calling. Hello? My voice cracked. Is someone there? The rustling stopped. Silence dropped heavy over the rows. Then, from deeper in the field, a giggle. High-pitched. Quick. I froze. It wasn't the sound of a kid playing. It was sharp, mocking, a sound that didn't belong. I backed out, heart hammering, stumbling until I hit the gravel shoulder. My breath came fast, ragged, like I'd just run a mile. That night, I dreamed of the family. The father leading the way, flashlight in hand. The mother clutching both kids close, their faces pale, eyes wide as the stalks closed behind them. In the dream, I tried to follow, but the rows stretched on forever, bending into blackness. And the farther I went, the louder the voices became, until I couldn't tell if they were crying for help or laughing at me. I woke up drenched in sweat, the sound still ringing in my ears. Over the next week, reports trickled in. People in town said they saw figures standing at the edges of fields. A tall man, a woman, 2 children. Always at dusk, always silent. By the time anyone approached, the rows were empty again. One farmer swore he heard laughter in the middle of the night, echoing from his fields, even though no one was there. He moved his family into town 2 days later. I wish I could say I didn't believe them, that I chalked it all up to panic and paranoia. But I'd been there. I'd heard the voices myself, and what haunts me most isn't that the family is gone. It's the thought that maybe they're still in there, not alive, not dead, just trapped, caught between the stalks, wandering endless rows, calling out with voices that don't quite sound human anymore. Sometimes, late on shift, when the radio is quiet and the road stretches empty, I think I hear them again. A boy, a girl, soft whispers bleeding in under the static, and I can't help but wonder if I went back. If I stepped into that field one more time, if I followed the voices deeper than before, would I finally find them? Or would I just join them? You can tell yourself the fields are just plants, just rows of stalks swaying in the wind. But once you've spent enough nights out there, you know better. The silence isn't empty, it's watching. The wind doesn't move the way it should, and sometimes when the moonlight falls just right, you see shapes between the rows that shouldn't be there. That's what happened the night we saw it. It was close to 2 in the morning. We were back at the same stretch of road where the family's car had been found. I don't even know why we returned. Maybe we thought the missing would come back. Maybe we couldn't let it go. Or maybe the cornfield itself had a pull we couldn't fight. Miller drove that night. Ruiz rode shotgun, silent, staring out the window like he expected something to be standing on the shoulder. I sat in the back, watching the beams of our headlights spill across the endless rows. The radio was quiet. Too quiet. Usually the static comforted me, a reminder that someone was out there listening. But that night, the silence pressed heavy, like even the airwaves didn't want to cut into it. Then Ruiz spoke. Just one word, stop. Miller hit the brakes. Gravel crunched under the tires, headlights locking on the wall of corn ahead. I leaned forward. What is it? Ruiz didn't answer. He just pointed. At first I saw nothing, just the stalks, tall and black against the pale wash of the beams. But then my eyes adjusted and I froze. There was a figure, deep in the corn, maybe 30 yards from the road. The stalks bent around it, but the outline was clear. Upright, still, human. Jesus. Miller muttered. Is that... Don't know, Ruiz cut in. His voice was flat, but I could hear the strain in it. The figure didn't move. Not an inch. No swaying with the stalks, no twitch of the head. Just standing there facing us. I felt my chest tighten. My first thought was the family. One of them lost, waiting for help. But something inside me resisted that hope. It was too still, too deliberate. We climbed out of the car. The night air was sharp and cold, carrying the faint smell of soil and damp husks. I held my flashlight tight, its beam cutting a narrow path into the rows. Hello? Miller called out. His voice cracked on the second syllable. You need help? Nothing. The figure stayed frozen, framed by the stalks. We stepped into the field. The corn closed around us instantly, swallowing the sound of the road. The light from the car dimmed behind us until it was just a faint glow. The silence was suffocating. Our boots crunched against dirt, but even that seemed muted. Every few steps, I lifted the beam of my flashlight, expecting the figure to be gone. But it wasn't. It was always there, standing, watching, waiting. I tried to focus on details, height, build, anything to pin it down. But the shadows bent strangely in the rows. Sometimes it looked taller, sometimes shorter. Sometimes broad-shouldered, sometimes thin. Like it didn't want us to know what it was. Closer, Ruiz whispered. I don't know if he meant it for us or for himself. We kept walking. 10 yards, then 15. My stomach twisted tighter with every step. At 20 yards, I stopped. Something about the air felt wrong. Thick, heavy, like walking underwater. I lifted my light, hand trembling. The beam landed on the figure. It was facing us. That much I knew. But the face, if it was a face, was in shadow. No reflection, no detail. Just a void where features should be. I froze, mouth dry. My mind scrambled to explain it. A trick of the light. A shadow cast by the stalks. But I knew better. It wasn't that the light missed its face. It was that there was nothing there to catch it. Sir? Miller tried again, his voice sharp now, commanding. Step forward. Nothing. Sir, if you need help, we can... The figure shifted. Not much. Just a twitch. A tilt of the head, slow and deliberate, like it was acknowledging us. My chest went cold. Ruiz swore under his breath, low and shaking. Back! He hissed. We need to go back. But I couldn't move. My feet rooted into the soil. My body pulled forward even as every instinct screamed to run. Then, from the dark, a sound. Soft, faint, like breath, not one voice, several. I stiffened. It was whispers, low and layered, coming from the figure's direction. But not spoken words. More like fragments, gasps, half-syllables. Dozens of them, all at once weaving over each other. Miller's hand went to his holster. What the hell is that? The whispers grew louder, overlapping until they bled into a constant murmur. I strained to pick out a word, a phrase, but it was impossible. It was everything and nothing, pouring through the rows like water, and then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence after was worse than the sound itself. The figure hadn't moved. It still stood there watching us. Only now I could feel it, not just see it. The weight of its attention pressing down, heavy and unblinking. Ruiz grabbed my arm. We're done. Now. This time I listened. We backed out slowly, flashlights shaking, never turning our backs. The figure stayed rooted where it was, as if nailed into the ground. Only when the glow of the cruiser's headlights reached us did I realize I was drenched in sweat, breath ragged. By the time we reached the car, my legs felt like lead. Miller slammed the door, hands shaking as he fumbled with the ignition. The engine roared to life, headlights flooding the first row of stalks. I turned in my seat for one last look. The figure was gone. Not vanished into the rows, not like it had slipped away. Just gone, as if it had never been there at all. We drove in silence, none of us speaking. The only sound was the tires humming against the asphalt, carrying us as far from the fields as possible. But even as the distance grew, the image stayed burned in my mind, a shape in the corn, faceless and still, standing with a patience that felt endless. And deep down, I knew what I didn't want to say out loud. It wasn't waiting for us to find it. It was waiting for us to come back. I still don't know why we went back. After that night with the figure, we should have stayed away. Any sane person would have. But the reports kept coming. More people missing. First the family, then a drifter who'd been hitchhiking down the highway, a couple heading home from a bar. Their car was found abandoned too, doors wide open, seats empty. The field was swallowing people, and no one wanted to admit it. So when the call came through, the sheriff demanding another sweep of the property, it wasn't like we had a choice. We were cops. We followed orders. Even if every step toward that field felt like marching into a grave. We went in 5 that night. Me, Miller, Ruiz, and 2 deputies from another precinct. I remember the look on their faces. They hadn't been there before. They still thought this was a search and rescue, not a walk into hell. The air was heavy. The stalks loomed high, their tassels bending like crooked fingers in the breeze. But the thing is, there was no breeze. The corn moved on its own, swaying, whispering, brushing together like it was breathing. I felt it in my chest. Like the rows weren't rows anymore. Like they were walls, closing. We spread out, flashlights cutting through the stalks. The beams looked weak out there, swallowed by the dark. I tried to call out to sound like I had control. Anyone here? We're here to help. Call out if you can hear us. Nothing. Just the sound of our boots sinking into soil, the dry hiss of leaves scraping against our sleeves, and underneath it all, something softer, a hum. At first I thought it was in my head, but then Ruiz froze, eyes darting. You hear that? We all did. It was low, steady, rising and falling like a chant. Not words, just a tone. Ancient, droning, vibrating in the marrow of your bones. We followed it deeper. The deeper we went, the less the rows felt straight. They bent, curved, twisted, until I couldn't tell if we were walking forward or in circles. That's when Miller shouted, "Over here!" I spun, flashlight beam jerking across the stalks. Miller's light was steady, fixed on something on the ground. I pushed through the leaves and saw it. A shoe, small, pink, the kind a little girl would wear. The sight of it hit me harder than anything else. Harder than the figure, harder than the whispers. Because it was real. Solid proof. The missing family had been here. A child had been here. I bent down and picked it up. It was damp, caked with mud. Too heavy for something so small. My throat tightened. That's when the sound changed. The hum broke apart. It became whispers again. Dozens of voices rising from the stalks. Male, female, young, old. All of them at once. The deputies panicked. One of them shouted, "Who's there?" His voice cracked. The other swung his flashlight wildly, light bouncing off stalks that seemed to close in tighter. And then, movement. Between the rows, shapes began to form. Figures, dozens, maybe hundreds. Standing just beyond the light, watching, Ruiz cursed, pulling at Miller's sleeve. "We need to go, now!" But it was too late. The stalks shifted violently, bending toward us as if pushed by invisible hands. The whispering surged, breaking into screams, laughter, sobs, all layered, all wrong. The deputies bolted. One turned left, the other right, disappearing into the corn. Their lights flickered, then vanished. No sound of footsteps, no cries. "Just gone." Miller drew his gun. His hands shook so bad the barrel rattled. "Stay close," he barked. But his voice was swallowed by the noise. I clutched the little shoe to my chest and tried to focus. But the rows moved. They weren't rows anymore. They were twisting, writhing, folding in on themselves. Something brushed my shoulder, cold, wet. I spun the light and caught a glimpse of skin. Not pale, not dark, just wrong, gray and raw like flesh stripped of blood. A hand, reaching through the stalks. I stumbled back, heart pounding, and the whispers roared with laughter. Ruiz grabbed me, yanking me forward. "Run!" We ran. I don't know in what direction. Forward, backward, sideways. It didn't matter. The corn was endless. Every turn led to more stalks, more shadows. And the figures, they moved with us. Always in the corner of my vision. Never closer, never farther. Just there. Then behind me a scream. "Miller!" I turned. His flashlight clattered to the ground, beams spinning wildly. I caught a glimpse of him thrashing, pulled backward into the stalks by hands. So many hands, clawing, dragging him down into the dark, and then he was gone. His light snapped off. The whispers hushed. Only my breath remained, ragged and weak. Ruiz pushed me harder. His face was pale, his eyes wide, but his voice stayed steady. "Keep going! Don't stop!" We stumbled through row after row, the ground soft beneath our boots, like walking on something that wasn't soil anymore. It felt spongy, alive. The air thickened. My lungs burned. The rows closed tighter until we could barely move between them. My flashlight flickered, dimming, then dying altogether. Darkness swallowed us. I couldn't see Ruiz anymore. I could only hear him, his breathing close, frantic. Then even that began to fade. "Ruiz?" I whispered. No answer. I spun in the dark, clutching the shoe, calling his name louder. My voice cracked, broke, vanished into the endless silence, and then I realized I was alone. I don't remember how I made it out. The memories blur, flashes of light, the crunch of stalks, the feeling of running without moving. Maybe I blacked out. Maybe something let me go. All I know is that I stumbled onto the road sometime near dawn. My clothes were torn. My skin scratched raw. My hands clutched the shoe so tight the plastic strap cut into my palm. There was no sign of Ruiz, no sign of Miller, no sign of the deputies. Just me and the shoe. I sat there on the shoulder of the road, shaking, staring at that tiny thing. Pink, mud-caked. A child's evidence, they called it later. Proof that the missing family had been there. But I knew it was more than that. It was a message. The field had given me something to carry back. A reminder. A warning. It didn't just take people. It harvested them. Collected them like crops. And I'd been spared for one reason only, so I could tell the story. They sent me out there just after midnight. The dispatcher's voice was calm, but I could hear the edge beneath it. A report had come in. A man standing on the old railway bridge. The one outside town, they called it the Suicide Bridge. I knew the place. Everyone in the county did. Rusted iron beams stretched over the river, long abandoned. The tracks had been pulled up years ago, but the bridge still stood. A skeleton of steel and wood, sagging into the dark water below. Too many people had climbed it. Too many had jumped. The drive out there was long and empty. No cars, no lights, just me and the hum of the cruiser. The headlights cut a narrow path through the night, but beyond that, everything was black. The kind of black that pressed on you like a weight on your chest. When I pulled up to the bridge, I saw him. A figure standing near the center. Alone. The iron beams rose around him like a cage. His back was to me, his arms hanging loose at his sides. I stepped out of the car and the night hit me. Damp. Cold. The river moved beneath the bridge, slow and heavy, like it didn't care about anything above. "Sir," I called, keeping my voice steady, "I need you to step back, away from the edge." He didn't move. I walked forward, boots crunching on the gravel, hand resting on my belt. "Not near my gun, just steady, calm. Sir, I know you can hear me. Let's talk, okay? Whatever it is, we can work through it." He finally turned his head. Just enough for me to see part of his face in the pale light, and something in me froze. He wasn't some kid or drunk looking for attention. His face was pale, drawn, with deep lines carved into it like he'd carried something heavy for years. His eyes, they didn't look scared. They didn't even look sad. They looked empty. "I can't," he said, voice rough, almost a whisper. "It won't let me." That made my stomach tighten. "What won't let you?" I asked. He turned back to the river, shifting closer to the edge. The boards creaked beneath his boots. I quickened my pace but kept my voice calm. "Don't do this. Whatever it is, we can fix it. Just step back and talk to me." He shook his head slowly. "You don't understand. I already tried." The wind picked up. The beams groaned, metal shifting against itself. I was close enough now to see his clothes, soaked, hanging heavy, like he'd walked through the river to get here. His hands trembled at his sides, but his body stayed still. "I tried to stay away," he said, "but it keeps calling. Every night I hear it. In the water. In my head." I stopped a few feet behind him. My pulse was racing, but I forced myself to sound calm. "What do you hear?" He tilted his head like he was listening to something deep below. His voice dropped lower, almost a growl. "Voices. The ones who jumped before. They're still down there, waiting." A chill went through me. I glanced at the river. It moved slow, dark, reflecting nothing. Just a black surface, silent. You don't have to listen to them, I said. You're not alone. Just step back, okay? We'll get you help. For a moment, I thought I'd reached him. His shoulders shifted. He leaned back, just slightly, as if torn. Then he laughed, soft, broken, not joyful at all. You think I'm the first one to stand here? You think anyone ever walks away? My mouth went dry. People have walked away. He finally turned to face me. His eyes locked on mine, and I swear they looked darker than before, like something had sunk into them. No, he said. They only get dragged back. Before I could react, he stepped backward. I lunged. My hand caught his sleeve, fingers digging into the soaked fabric. The board beneath him cracked, splinters snapping, and for a second we both teetered on the edge. "Hold on!" I shouted. His face was inches from mine. And he wasn't fighting. He wasn't panicking. He just stared, calm as stone. "You'll see," he whispered. The sleeve tore in my grip. He fell. I heard the splash below, a hollow sound swallowed by the river. My flashlight beam cut across the water, searching, frantic. Ripples spread, then stilled. No thrashing, no bubbles. No sign of him at all, just silence. I stood there shaking, breath loud in my ears. The river looked untouched, as if he'd never been there. I called it in. My voice cracked on the radio, words stumbling. Backup was sent. Search teams. Divers. They found nothing. Not that night. Not the next day. Not ever. The official report says, body unrecovered. Another name added to the list. Another ghost for the bridge. But I know what I saw. That look in his eyes. The way he spoke. Like he wasn't choosing to jump. Like he was answering something. Something in the water. And sometimes when I drive past that road at night, I swear I see a figure standing on the bridge, waiting, just like he was. They brought in everything the next morning. Boats, divers, dogs, the whole response. It was like a small army had descended on the old bridge. The news hadn't gotten out yet, but every deputy on shift knew. Another one gone. We combed the river, the banks, the rocks downstream. Hours passed with nothing but silence, except for the engines of the boats and the men calling out to each other. The river gave us nothing. By the second day, the current theory was that his body had been carried farther downstream, that maybe it had snagged under debris, or settled deep in the silt where no diver could reach. But I couldn't let it go. The way he'd looked at me, like he knew something I didn't. Like he wasn't falling to escape his pain, but falling because something had claimed him. I replayed his words in my head over and over. You'll see, that night, after the official search was suspended, I drove back to the bridge. I told myself it was just to clear my head, to stand there one last time and let it sink in. But the truth is, I wanted to know. I wanted to feel whatever it was that had pulled him over the edge. The sky was cloudy, the moon barely pushing through. My flashlight beam swung over the beams of rust and the boards beneath my feet. Every creak echoed into the night. The air smelled of iron and water. Cold. Old. I walked to the spot where I had grabbed him. The board still showed the crack from where it had split under his weight. My fingers brushed over it, rough and splintered. The river below moved slow, black and endless. I leaned on the rail and listened. At first there was nothing but the sound of water. Then, after a long stretch of silence, I heard something else. It was faint, carried up through the steel and the wood. Sobbing. I froze. My heart slammed in my chest. I held my breath and leaned closer. The sound was coming from directly beneath me. Not on the bank, not from the trees. From under the bridge itself. It was the sound of a man crying, low, broken, steady. I called out, voice trembling before I could stop it. Hello? Who's down there? The sobbing stopped. The river went quiet again. I pulled my light over the side, sweeping the beam across the supports and the water below. Nothing. Just black water sliding past. Smooth and calm, but I knew what I had heard. I stepped back, feeling the wood shift beneath me. My throat was dry, my hands damp. I wanted to call it in, to get someone else out there, but what would I say? That I'd heard a ghost crying under the bridge? No one would believe me. Still, I couldn't shake the sound. It clung to me even after I drove away. That night, when I closed my eyes, I swore I still heard it, muffled and wet, echoing from below me. The next day, I told myself it had to have been something natural. An animal, a trick of the current. But part of me knew better. The old-timers in town had always whispered about that bridge, about the people who had jumped. Some said they'd seen shadows moving along the beams at night. Others swore they'd heard voices when no one was there. I'd always brushed it off as stories, the kind you tell to scare rookies. But now, I wasn't so sure. I went back again the following week, alone. The river looked the same, but I felt different standing there. My skin prickled, like the night was watching me, like the bridge itself had eyes. I leaned over the rail and whispered into the dark, "Is someone there?" For a long time, there was nothing. Just the steady flow of the river. Then the sobbing started again, this time closer, louder. I could almost make out words buried in the sound. A man's voice, breaking apart with grief, rising and falling with the water. It was him, the man I'd seen jump. I was sure of it. My chest tightened, panic clawing up my throat. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. "Where are you?" I whispered. The crying stopped again. And then I heard something new, a whisper, so faint I thought I might be imagining it. Words carried on the wind, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "Come down." My heart hammered so hard I thought it would break through my ribs. I staggered back from the rail, flashlight trembling in my hand. The bridge groaned. The beams rattled, though there was no wind, and I ran. I didn't stop until I was back in my cruiser, doors locked, engine roaring. My hands gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles went white. When I finally looked back, the bridge was just a black shape against the river. Still, silent. But I could swear, even from the road I heard it. That sobbing, low and steady, following me. I didn't tell anyone about what I'd heard. Not the other deputies, not the sergeant, nobody. It stayed with me, quiet and heavy, like a secret pressed against my chest. But sometimes, when the shift runs late and I pass that road, I feel it again, like someone is waiting under that bridge, crying in the dark, waiting for me. I should have stayed away. That's what I kept telling myself. Every time I passed that turnoff, every time my shift took me near the bridge, I told myself to keep driving. Don't look. Don't think about it. Just let it go. But I couldn't. The image of that man falling, the way his voice broke when he said, "You'll see," it stayed with me. And the sobbing, that sound had wormed its way inside my head. Sometimes I thought I heard it even when I was at home, in the shower, half asleep in bed. It was always there, low and broken, like it was calling just for me. So one night I went back again. I told myself it was to prove something, to face the fear and get it out of my system. But the truth is, part of me needed to know, needed to feel if it was real or just my mind breaking down. It was near 2 a.m. when I parked the cruiser. The air was colder than before, sharp enough to sting my nose. A thin fog clung to the river, drifting around the beams of the bridge like smoke. I stepped onto the wood, my flashlight beam bouncing across rusted bolts and warped planks. The sound of my boots echoed, hollow and lonely. Every step seemed too loud, like I was intruding. The deeper I walked, the heavier it felt. The air itself seemed thick, like it was pressing against me. By the time I reached the middle, my chest was tight, my breath shallow. I leaned on the railing and shone my light over the water. The beam cut into the fog, but the river only reflected back emptiness, black, bottomless. For a long while, I heard nothing but the soft lap of the current. Then, faintly, the sobbing began again. It rose from beneath the bridge, slow and steady, curling up through the steel and wood. It was clearer than ever before. A man's voice breaking apart in grief. I swallowed hard. My throat burned. "Who are you?" I called down. The crying kept on, but softer, like it was moving away. Then it stopped. The silence was worse than the sound, and that's when I felt it. A hand, cold, wet, fingers wrapping tight around my wrist. I yanked back with a shout, nearly dropping my light. My heart stopped dead in my chest. I spun in a panic, shining the beam behind me. Nothing, no one, but the feeling remained. My skin tingled, frozen where it had touched me. I raised my sleeve and my breath caught. The fabric was damp, wet to the touch, as if I'd dipped my arm in the river. My pulse hammered in my ears. My eyes scanned every shadow, every beam, every inch of that bridge. It was empty. I was alone. Then I heard it. My name, whispered, low, so close it felt like it brushed against my ear. Deputy! I stumbled back, flashlight jerking. My legs shook beneath me, the boards groaning under my boots. Who's there? My voice cracked, trembling. No answer, just the slow roll of the river. I backed away, step by step, never turning my back on the center of the bridge. Every shadow seemed to breathe. Every creak sounded like footsteps following just behind. When I finally reached the gravel, I ran. I slammed myself into the cruiser, locked the doors, and sat there with my breath tearing in and out of my chest. My hand throbbed where the fingers had clutched me. I held it close, staring at the damp mark darkening my sleeve. It was real. Something had touched me. Something down there knew my name. I drove back fast, headlights cutting wild through the night. By the time I reached the station, my pulse hadn't slowed. My fellow deputies joked at the sight of me, pale and shaking, but I didn't tell them. I couldn't. How could I explain that I'd been grabbed by a hand that wasn't there? That the voice of a dead man had whispered to me? They'd think I was losing it. Maybe I was, but that night lying awake in the dark, I felt it again, that cold grip tightening around my wrist. And I knew whatever was on that bridge wasn't finished with me. It was waiting, calling, and sooner or later, I'd have to answer. They call Route 17 cursed. If you ask the older folks around town, they'll tell you stories about accidents, about people swerving into ditches, about cars flipped upside down, about bodies being pulled from the wreck. And always, somewhere in the retelling, they'll mention it. The dog, a huge black shape darting across the asphalt, too fast to see until it's right in front of your bumper. They say if you're lucky, you just end up in the hospital. If you're not, you don't make it home at all. I used to laugh it off. Just another ghost story meant to scare teenagers. A way for parents to keep their kids from racing at night. But then I started working night shifts, and I had to drive that road more than once. The first time I noticed how empty it felt out there. Miles of highway with nothing but trees pressing in on either side. The kind of dark that swallows your headlights whole. No gas stations, no houses. Just the hum of tires and the weight of silence. That's when I started to believe the stories. Because every time I drove Route 17, I felt it. That crawling pressure on the back of my neck like I was being watched. My eyes would blur, my hands gripping the wheel so tight they ached. I told myself it was just nerves, just my imagination. But then I saw it. It was late, maybe close to midnight. I'd just finished a double shift and was dragging myself home. The road was empty. No headlights coming, no taillights ahead. Just me and the trees. I remember yawning, rolling the window down to get some air. And that's when it happened. Something moved in the beams of my headlights. It shot out of the tree line, low and fast. At first I thought it was a deer, but no, this was different. The shape was massive, heavier, its back arched, its stride strange. And then I saw it clearly, a dog, jet black, bigger than any dog I'd ever seen. Its fur was matted, hanging in thick clumps. Its head was low, almost dragging, eyes catching the light like burning coals. I didn't think. I just swerved. My tires screamed against the asphalt, my whole body thrown against the seatbelt. The car fishtailed, the guardrail flashing in my vision before I yanked the wheel back. Somehow I missed it. When I came to a stop, I was shaking, hands trembling on the wheel. I looked back in the mirror, searching the road, the shoulder, the trees. Nothing, no animal, no sound, just the whisper of the wind through the branches. I told myself it had to be a stray, a trick of the light. But when I stepped out to check, my heart dropped. There were no tracks. The shoulder was soft from the rain earlier that day, but the dirt was untouched. No paw prints, no broken grass, nothing at all. It was like the thing had never been there. I got back in the car, shut the door, and locked it. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't get enough air. And the strangest part? Even though I knew I hadn't hit anything, my headlights showed a smear across the road, dark, wet, like something had been dragged. I pressed the gas and didn't stop until I saw the lights of town. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it wasn't real. I even drove back out during the day, thinking I'd find some explanation. But Route 17 in daylight felt different. Normal. Just cracked asphalt and quiet woods. No black dog. No stains on the road. Still, the feeling didn't leave me. A week later, I heard about the accident. A man, driving home from the bar, swerved to miss something. Lost control. Hit the ditch so hard they said the car flipped twice. By the time they pulled him out, it was too late. When I asked what he had swerved for, one of the deputies just shook his head. Witnesses said it was a dog. He muttered. Black, big one. But we didn't find any sign of it. That's when the old stories stopped being funny, because I knew what he'd seen. The same thing I had. And once you've seen it, you can't laugh it off anymore. You can't shrug it away. It's real. It's out there on that road, waiting. And it doesn't care if you believe in it or not. When you wear a badge long enough, you learn the road becomes a second home. Most nights it's routine. Speeders, drunks, deer darting across the highway. The kind of stuff you handle half asleep. But some nights the road feels alive, like it's holding its breath, waiting for something. That's how Route 17 feels every time I take it. I'd heard the stories, of course. Every deputy had. The black dog wasn't just a campfire tale. It was something whispered about in the patrol room, the way old-timers talk about the one call that never left them. A warning without words. I thought it was nonsense, until the night I saw it myself. It was late. My shift was almost over, and I was cutting across 17 to head back into town. The road was empty, just a stretch of cracked asphalt between walls of dark trees. My headlights cut a tunnel through the night. The hum of the cruiser filled the silence, steady and familiar. Then, in the corner of my vision, something moved. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, branches swaying in the wind. But then it bolted into the beam of my headlights, fast and heavy. A dog, huge, blacker than the night itself. Its body was low, shoulders rolling with each stride, fur hanging in thick mats that seemed to swallow the light. Its eyes glowed. I swear they did. 2 burning points fixed on me as it crossed the road. Instinct took over. I slammed the brakes, the cruiser skidding sideways with a scream of rubber. My heart slammed against my ribs, the seatbelt biting across my chest. For a split second, I thought I'd hit it. I braced myself for the thud, for the crack of bone against metal, but it never came. The dog was gone. I sat there in the middle of Route 17, hands shaking on the wheel, chest heaving as I tried to breathe. My headlights cut across empty pavement, across trees that swayed gently in the wind. No animal, no movement, nothing. But my body knew different. My skin was crawling, every hair on my arm standing up. I felt watched, not just from the trees or the shadows, but from inside the car itself. Like something had slipped in with me, sitting just out of sight, waiting. I tried to laugh it off, but my voice cracked in the silence. I reached for the radio, just for the comfort of hearing another voice. But stopped. What would I even say? Dispatch, I nearly wrecked because a ghost dog ran in front of me? They'd laugh me out of the department. So I sat there, forcing myself to breathe until my pulse slowed. When I finally eased the cruiser forward again, I kept it slow, my eyes scanning every shadow. The trees pressed in closer, branches arching overhead like claws. Every so often I swore I saw movement, something pacing me just beyond the headlights, keeping to the tree line. And then, the smell hit me. Rot, like roadkill left too long in the sun, thick and sour. It filled the cruiser in an instant, clinging to the back of my throat. I gagged, rolling down the window, but the night air was no better. The stench clung to everything, coating the inside of my mouth until I could almost taste it. That's when I saw it again, just ahead, standing dead center in the road. The dog. Its head hung low, lips curled back to reveal teeth that looked too long, too jagged. Its eyes caught the light and burned red, unblinking. I froze. My hands tightened on the wheel, but I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. It felt like those eyes pinned me in place, like if I looked away for even a second, it would be on me. The engine hummed softly, the only sound in the world. Time stretched thin, And then without a sound, it turned and walked off the road. Not running this time, not fast. Just slow, deliberate steps back into the corn-black woods. I sat there long after it vanished, staring at the spot where it had been. My body was locked in place, sweat dripping down the back of my neck. Finally, I forced myself to move. I drove the rest of the way with the window down, the cold air burning my lungs, trying to keep myself awake. When I pulled into the lot back at the station, I killed the engine and just sat there in the silence. The smell was gone. The cruiser looked fine. Normal, like nothing had happened. But when I closed my eyes that night, I saw them again. Those burning eyes. And I realized something I haven't been able to shake since. That dog. It didn't run because it was scared of my cruiser. It didn't stand in the road because it was lost. It wanted me to see it, like it was waiting. After that night on Route 17, I couldn't shake it. I tried. I told myself it was just an animal, some stray gone wild. But the truth was heavier than that. The truth was in the silence that followed me home, the way every creak of my house felt like it had weight. The truth was in my dreams, those eyes burning through the dark no matter how tightly I closed mine. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I went digging. Every department has its archives, old boxes stacked in corners that smell like dust and mold. Most of it's boring, case files, property logs, old arrest reports no one cares about anymore. But buried in all that junk, you can find the stories people wanted forgotten. I started there. At first it was small things. A handwritten note about a driver swerving to avoid large animal. No crash, no injuries. Just a note. That was from 1973. Then another in 84. Same road, same wording. Then again in 92. Each one almost identical, like they were copying from the same script. But it went further back than that. I found newspaper clippings, yellow and brittle, about phantom animals haunting travelers outside town. Words like omen and specter. Even one calling it the devil's hound. One article in particular stuck with me. 1911. A farmer swore a giant black dog stalked the edge of his fields every night for a week. On the seventh night, he was found hanging in his barn, and the part that chilled me? His wife said he'd told her the night before that he heard the dog whisper his name. I read that line 3 times, my chest tight, because I thought of the bridge case. The one where the deputies swore someone grabbed him in the dark and whispered to him. It was like the pieces were all there, scattered across decades. But no one wanted to put them together, so I kept digging. I asked around quietly. The old deputies, the ones close to retirement, they didn't laugh when I brought it up. They just got quiet. One of them, a guy named Mackey, finally told me something I'll never forget. He said, "If you see the dog once, count yourself lucky. If you see it twice, start saying your goodbyes." I asked him what that meant, but he wouldn't look at me. He just walked away. That night I went deeper. I pulled files not just from our county, but the Historical Society's archives downtown. That place is like a time capsule. Ledgers, maps, records going back to when this land was just dirt trails and scattered farms, and there it was. References to the dog. Over and over, some of the earliest were from settlers, scratching notes in journals. A great black beast upon the road. The hound that walks without sound. A shadow with teeth. One entry from 1799 stopped me cold. It described a family murdered in their farmhouse, the father's head crushed, the children drowned in the well. The mother's body was never found. Witnesses swore that in the weeks leading up to the killings, a black dog had been seen circling the property every night, its eyes glowing in the dark. That detail, the eyes, it was always there. Glowing red or yellow or like fire. Sometimes they said it was just one, sometimes 2. But always glowing, always watching, and always followed by death. I sat there in the records room with the hum of a fluorescent light overhead, staring at the words until the letters blurred. It didn't feel like I was researching anymore. It felt like I was piecing together something that had been waiting for me, like the dog wasn't just on the road. It was in the stories, in the paper, in the ink itself. The more I read, the clearer the pattern became. It wasn't random. Every sighting, every mention, lined up with something violent. A murder, a suicide, a disappearance. The black dog wasn't just some phantom on the highway. It was tied to blood. It was tied to death. And then I found the part that made my skin crawl. A diary entry, tucked inside a folder of old church records from the late 1800s. The handwriting was shaky, barely legible, but I forced myself to make it out. It spoke of a curse laid upon the land after a lynching. A man accused of killing 2 children had been strung up from an oak by the river. The crowd swore justice was done, but his mother, an old woman with a reputation for strange practices, stood at the base of that tree and screamed words no one understood. The next night, the first sighting of the black dog was recorded. The diary claimed she called it into being. A sentinel, a watcher, a punisher. Whatever it was, it hadn't left since. I sat there for a long time staring at that word, watcher, because that's what it felt like on the road. Not an animal, not a ghost. A watcher. It wasn't hunting me. Not yet. It was just watching. By the time I left the records room, my head was buzzing. My body felt heavy, like I'd been awake for days. The night outside was thick, the streets empty, my reflection staring back from dark windows. Driving home, I kept catching myself looking for it in the mirrors, in the corners of the headlights, in the ditch. And that's when the thought hit me, hard enough to make my stomach twist. Maybe it wasn't about the people who saw it. Maybe it was about the people who went digging, the ones who went looking for answers they weren't meant to have. Because every story, every file, every clipping ended the same way, with someone dead. I closed the box of files that night and shoved it back into the corner. I told myself I'd leave it there, that I wouldn't go further. But the thing about the dog, the more you know, the closer it gets. And I swear, even as I sit here now, I can feel it. Just outside the glow of the porch light. Waiting. I thought I could leave it alone. After that night in the archives, I told myself I was done. I boxed the files back up, shoved them into storage, and tried to bury the whole thing in the back of my mind. But the problem with something like this, it doesn't let you bury it. It follows. It waits. And one evening, it was there again. Not on the road this time. Not flickering in headlights or moving in the shadows. No, this time it was right in town, in the heart of everything. It was sitting on the courthouse steps. I was driving through after my shift, half dead from exhaustion, when I saw it. At first I thought it was just a stray, some big mutt wandering downtown. But then the shape became clearer in the glow of the streetlight. Thick, heavy fur. A body too big for any normal dog. Those eyes. Even from across the street, they burned. It wasn't growling. It wasn't moving. Just sitting there like it had all the time in the world. And the strangest part? No one else seemed to notice. A couple of kids were walking past on the sidewalk. They didn't even glance its way. An older man was locking his shop door across the square. Not a flicker of recognition, but me. I couldn't look anywhere else. The dog sat there, shoulders rising and falling with slow breaths, eyes never leaving me. And in that moment, I knew. It wasn't random. It wasn't chance. It was for me. I parked my cruiser across the street and just sat there gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles cracked. Part of me wanted to radio it in, get someone else to come see, but the words caught in my throat. How could I explain it without sounding insane? Besides, I already knew no one else would see it. So I stepped out. The night air felt heavy, pressing down on my shoulders. My boots scraped against the pavement as I crossed, every sound too loud in the quiet square. The closer I got, the more the air seemed to hum, like the buzz before a storm, and the dog just sat there, waiting. When I reached the bottom of the courthouse steps, I froze. The animal was only a few feet away now. Its fur rippled, blacker than the shadows around it. Its chest rose and fell slow and steady, but there was no sound, no panting, no growl, no movement except for those burning eyes. I wanted to turn back, to run. But something deeper than fear kept me rooted. It wasn't threatening me. Not exactly. It was inviting me. I took one step up. The wooden railing of the old courthouse creaked. The dog didn't flinch. Another step. The light above the doors flickered, casting shadows across its face. For the first time, I noticed its mouth. The lips were curled, not into a snarl, but something close to a smile. And then, just for a second, I thought I heard it. A voice, not barking, not growling. A whisper, low, stretched thin, like words dragged through water. It said my name. I swear to God it said my name. I stumbled back down the steps, heart hammering so loud I couldn't hear anything else. But the dog didn't chase me, didn't move at all. It just watched. I don't remember driving home. I don't remember unlocking my door. I just remember waking up hours later, still in my uniform, sitting on the floor of my living room with every light on. The courthouse steps burned in my mind. That image, that presence. So the next day, I went back. In the daylight, of course. The square was busy. People going to work, buses pulling in, kids riding bikes across the grass. The steps were empty. No trace of it. But I asked around anyway. I brought it up to a clerk inside the courthouse. She just laughed, said the only dogs she'd seen around were strays people dumped by the highway. I asked a retired deputy, one who'd been around since the 70s. He got quiet, then told me flat out, don't talk about it. Don't give it breath. That's how it sticks to you. But it was already too late for that. Because it didn't matter if no one else saw it. I did. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. That night I dreamed of the steps again. The courthouse, empty and still, but the dog was there, sitting where it had been before. Only this time, when I walked up, it didn't stay silent. It opened its mouth wide, wider than any animal should. And the sound that came out wasn't a growl. It was screaming. Voices, hundreds of them, men, women, children, all screaming at once. I woke up gasping, sweat-soaked, the echo of those voices still ringing in my ears. I didn't sleep again. The next day, I did something I swore I wouldn't. I went back to the files. I needed to know. And the deeper I dug, the more it felt like everything was pointing to this. There were mentions, hidden in the margins of reports, of sightings near the courthouse going back decades. Not just on the road, not just in fields, always near places of judgment. Places of law, like it was tied to punishment. To justice twisted into something else. And every time it appeared there, someone in the county died soon after. Not random deaths. Deaths that shook people. Murders, suicides, accidents that didn't make sense. The courthouse wasn't just a backdrop. It was a stage, and the dog was the one waiting for the final act. When I closed the last file, I realized something that chilled me more than anything else. It hadn't been an accident that I saw it on the road. It hadn't been chance that I found the files, or the stories, or the warnings. It had been leading me here step by step, closer and closer, and now it was just waiting for me to cross. That night, I couldn't fight it anymore. I drove to the square after dark, parked across the street, and stared at the courthouse steps. At first, they were empty, just stone and shadow. But the longer I sat there, the more the darkness seemed to shift, to thicken. And then, it was there, sitting exactly where it had been before. The same eyes, the same stillness, the same slow, steady rise and fall of its chest. I knew then it wasn't about stopping it. It wasn't about surviving it. It was about crossing. Because once the dog chooses you, there's no turning back. And I swear, even as I sit here telling this, I can still see it on those steps. Waiting. For me. For you. For whoever is next. Because the black dog doesn't forget, and it doesn't forgive, it just waits. Working nights at the county jail isn't like the movies. It isn't constant shouting or fights or chaos. Most nights it's dead quiet. Too quiet, honestly. I've worked that shift long enough to know the rhythm of it. The holding cells settle down around midnight. The paperwork's done. The hum of the vending machines in the hall becomes the loudest thing in the building. And if you're not careful, that silence crawls under your skin. That night started like any other. I made my rounds, checked the locks, logged the times. The holding area was empty, just rows of bunks behind bars, lit by buzzing fluorescent lights. Cold concrete, the smell of disinfectant clinging to everything. Empty. That's the important part. I remember seeing it, clear as day. Every bunk stripped bare, not a soul inside. So when I heard voices later, I thought I was losing it. It was around 2 in the morning. I was at the desk, flipping through old reports just to keep my eyes open, when the sound drifted down the hallway, muffled at first. Like 2 men talking low, I froze, set the report down, tilted my head. It wasn't the radio. That was off. It wasn't coming from an office either. No, this was coming from the holding cells. I got up and walked slow, boots echoing against the tile. The closer I got, the clearer it became. 2 distinct voices, one deep, gravelly, the other higher, nervous. I couldn't make out words at first, just the rhythm of conversation, the rise and fall like 2 people going back and forth. When I reached the bars, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. The cell was still empty, but the voices, they didn't stop. They were louder now, right in front of me, like the air itself was carrying them. I stood there staring at bare bunks, at concrete walls, while these unseen men kept talking, and finally I caught the words. "He won't make it out." Then a pause. "They never do," I whispered out loud without meaning to. "Hello?" The voices stopped. Just like that. The silence was so sudden it rang in my ears. I waited, heart pounding, but nothing answered back. I did a full sweep of the cells, checked every corner, every bunk, even though I knew damn well no one was there. The locks were secure. The log showed no intakes. Nothing. I told myself maybe it was sound carrying through the vents, an officer talking in another part of the building, or maybe I was just tired, hearing things after too much caffeine and too little sleep. But the thing is, the voices came back not once, not twice, all night, sometimes just a murmur like whispers under a blanket, sometimes clear enough to catch whole sentences, and every time I went to look, the cells were empty. By dawn, I was rattled. I kept replaying it in my head, trying to make sense of it. But the worst part was what I heard right before shift change. I was at the desk again, waiting for the day crew to show up, when the deep voice came back, low and steady. This time, it wasn't talking to another man, it was talking to me. "You're listening now." I swear to God, that's what it said. I didn't tell anyone. What could I say? That the empty cells were carrying on conversations at night? They'd laughed me out of the building, but I couldn't shake it. The way those voices filled the room, the weight of them, like the walls themselves had learned to speak. I drove home that morning with the sunrise burning my eyes, but the words stayed lodged in my head. "He won't make it out." They never do. You're listening now. It didn't feel like random chatter. It felt directed, and I had the sickening thought that maybe, just maybe, those holding cells weren't empty after all. Not in the way we think. Because in the quiet hours of the night, when the building hums and the world forgets you, something else remembers and it talks. The thing about working nights is you start noticing details no one else cares about. Little things. The chipped paint around the vents. The way the buzz of the fluorescence stutters when the bulbs are about to go. After that first night with the voices, I started paying closer attention. Not just to the sounds, but to the holding cells themselves. I wanted to prove to myself that I hadn't gone crazy, that maybe the voices were a trick of the building. Old pipes, old wiring, bad acoustics. Something I could explain. But what I found made everything worse. It was 3 nights later. The place was quiet again, dead like always. I was doing rounds, walking the line of cells, flashlight in hand. That's when I noticed the scratches on the back wall of the first cell, just above the lower bunk. Small lines carved into the paint. At first I thought it was graffiti, junk left by some drunk who spent the night locked up. But when I got closer, I realized they weren't random. They were letters, a name. I leaned in, running my finger over the grooves. The letters spelled out E. Carter. I frowned. The name felt familiar, but I couldn't place it. I moved to the next cell. Another scratch. This one deeper, messier, but still clear. H. Reyes. Then another. And another. Every cell I checked, there was a name carved somewhere into the paint. Some near the bunks. Some low to the ground, like they'd been scratched by someone sitting on the floor. Dozens of them. Different handwriting. Different depths of carving. But all with that same desperate edge. By the time I'd gone through them all, my skin was crawling. because I realized what was bothering me. These weren't just random names. They were familiar, because I'd read them before, on case files, on reports, unsolved homicides. I didn't believe it at first. I thought maybe my memory was playing tricks on me. So I pulled the old files from storage during my next break. And there they were, one after another. Eric Carter, stabbed behind a gas station, no arrests. Hector Reyes, shot in his driveway, no witnesses. Names that had haunted the sheriff's office for years, and they were all scratched into the walls of the holding cells. Some cases were so old they'd happened before I was even born. Others were fresh enough that the families were still calling for updates, but the names matched, every single one. I just sat there with the files spread out on the desk, staring at the words until my eyes blurred. How could that be? How could murder victims' names end up carved into the cells of our little county jail? No one ever said anything about it. I'd worked there for years. If the other deputies knew, they never mentioned it. And the more I thought about it, the more my stomach turned. Because I realized the placement of the names. It wasn't random either. Some were etched deep into the paint, like the letters had been carved with force. Others were faint, barely scratched, like someone had written them quickly, with no strength left. It was almost like whoever carved them hadn't just been writing a name, they'd been leaving a mark, a record, a warning. That night, the voices came back, but they were different. I was walking past the cells, flashlight catching the shine of the carvings, when I heard them again. Low, whispering. But this time, I recognized something in the sound. It wasn't conversation anymore. It was chanting, repeating, names. I stopped dead, hand tightening on the light, because I realized what I was hearing. They were reading the names, not all at once, a few at a time, as if invisible mouths were dragging the words across the air. E. Carter, H. Reyes, D. Mathers. I froze, because I had seen those exact names just hours before, staring at me from case files. The voices droned on, low and steady, like they were reciting a list that never ended. And then they said mine, clear, perfect, my full name, echoing off concrete walls. I nearly dropped the flashlight. My throat went dry, because my name wasn't carved into any wall. I'd checked, not yet. I backed away, shaking, heart hammering, trying not to run but wanting nothing more than to get out of that hallway. The voices faded the further I got, until they were nothing but a dull hum behind me. I didn't sleep when I got home. I sat in the dark, going over it again and again. Why the names? Why the voices? And why mine? I thought about telling someone. The sheriff, a fellow deputy, anyone, but what could I say? That the walls of the jail were keeping records of the dead? That I was hearing a death list read out loud in the middle of the night? No one would believe me. Hell, I barely believed me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the cells were trying to tell me something. That those names weren't just scratches. They were promises. Because when I closed my eyes, all I could hear was that voice in the dark, dragging its way across the syllables of my own name, and I knew deep down that one day soon, my name would be carved into the wall too. I used to think there was nothing lonelier than being the only man on duty in the jail at night. But I was wrong. Loneliness is easy. It's familiar. It doesn't scare you. What I felt that last night wasn't loneliness. It was something colder, something final. By then, the voices had become part of the routine, whispering from the empty cells, drifting in and out like smoke. I didn't even jump anymore. I just tried to ignore them, keep my head down and finish the shift. But the names on the walls stayed with me. Every time I walked past those bunks, I swore I could feel the weight of the dead pressing through the concrete. Like the building wasn't just holding prisoners, it was holding memories. And every time I passed the scratches, I checked, just to make sure my name wasn't there. Not yet. That night, though, something was different. I could feel it as soon as I walked in. The air was heavier, still. Even the hum of the lights seemed muffled. I did my usual rounds, flashlight sweeping across the cells, counting them out of habit. Empty, empty, empty. Until I got to the third one. I stopped cold, because someone was sitting on the lower bunk, head bent forward. hands resting on his knees, shoulders rising and falling with slow breaths. I froze, every instinct telling me that cell was locked, that it had been empty when I came in. For a second, I thought maybe a prisoner had been brought in earlier and I hadn't been told. But the paperwork would have been there, and the doors would have been opened with my key. So I stepped. Closer, quiet, careful, and that's when he lifted his head. I can't explain the feeling that went through me when I saw his face, because it was mine. Every detail. The lines around the mouth, the scar above the eyebrow I got in high school, the tired eyes staring back at me. I was looking at myself, sitting in the cell. I staggered back, hand slipping on the flashlight. The beam swung across the wall, catching the carved names in its light. But my double didn't move, didn't speak. He just sat there watching me like he'd been waiting. For the first time, I noticed how pale he looked. Like his skin had been drained of color. His lips were dry, cracked. And his eyes, they weren't just tired. They were empty. I forced myself to speak, though my voice sounded thin. "Who are you?" He tilted his head, just slightly, like the question confused him. Then he smiled, and it was my smile. Only wrong, too slow, too heavy. Like the muscles didn't remember how to do it. My heart was pounding so hard, I could barely hear the words when they came. "You know my name." I felt the blood drain from my face. Because I did. I didn't want to admit it, but I did. This thing, this reflection, it was the same voice I'd heard whispering in the dark, the same one that had spoken my name among the dead. I turned, half ready to run, but something stopped me. The air was so heavy it felt like I was moving through water. When I looked back, he was standing, not fast, not sudden, just rising slowly from the bunk, like a man who had all the time in the world, and the sound of it, the scrape of his shoes against the concrete, echoed too loud in the silence. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over myself until I pressed against the opposite wall of the hall. He stood there inside the cell, his face inches from the bars. My face. The light caught him, and for the first time, I saw the scratches on the wall behind him, fresh ones, letters gouged deep into the paint, and I didn't even need to read them to know. It was my name. I shook my head, muttering to myself, trying to convince my own brain this wasn't real, that I was exhausted, that this was just another trick of the building. But he leaned forward, pressing his forehead against the bars, and whispered, "It's already written." The sound of my own voice coming from that mouth nearly made me collapse. I couldn't look at him anymore. I turned and ran, boots hammering down the hall, light bouncing wildly off the walls. The voices rose around me as I moved, all of them whispering at once, chanting names, chanting mine. The whole building vibrated with it, a low hum that crawled into my bones. I didn't stop until I was outside in the night air, gasping like I'd just broken the surface of deep water. But even out there, the silence didn't feel right. The wind through the trees sounded too thin. The stars overhead felt too far away. And when I looked back through the barred windows of the jail, I saw him, sitting calmly on the bunk again, waiting. I didn't go back inside. Not that night. Not ever. I quit the job the next morning, packed up my things and left the county behind. But no matter where I go, I can still feel him, that pale version of myself sitting in the dark, scratching my name into the wall of a cell that was supposed to be empty. Sometimes when I wake in the middle of the night, I swear I hear it again. The sound of my own voice whispering from the corner of the room, telling me it's already written, and I know one day soon I'll see him again, not in the jail, not in some cell, but sitting in the shadows of my own home, waiting for me to sit down beside him,